So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Lisa Hill, Associate Director of Research and Skills at NERC. And I'm joined today by Susan Waldron, Director of Research and Skills, and Maraki Mikrodaki, Associate Director of EDI and Advocacy. It's a pleasure to be hosting today's event, bringing together speakers from projects funded under two calls launched last year that were designed to explore and improve equality, diversity and inclusion in environmental science, and to share some of the outcomes and good practice from those projects. Some brief housekeeping before we start. If you have questions for our speakers today, please do use the Q&A function. And if your question is directed towards an individual or individuals, it would be great if you could preface the question with their names. And we'll try to get through as many questions as we can in the Q&A slots. Please can I remind our speakers to stay on mute with cameras off until they are speaking today. And finally, just a reminder that we have a break scheduled at 10:55 and we'll be wrapping up at 1:15 today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Susan Waldron, who's going to give us an introduction to diversity and inclusion within NERC and UKRI.
Thanks, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. I am very pleased that we are holding this event, and I'm really grateful that you have made the time to join us, and for the speakers have made the time to be prepared to share their information in this session. Could I have the first slide, please, of my presentation? I just have a bit of a bandwidth issue this morning. So Lauren, if you could share the slides, that would be great. If I can try it if it's easier. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, and put it on full screen. Thank you very much. So all I wanted to do is very briefly give you an overview of why we're at this stage. And UKRI as an organisation is very committed to actually trying to improve the diversity of those who feel that they can apply for funding and those that are in receipt of funding. And after the publication of the Research and Development People and Culture Strategy in July 2021, we have opened a draft consultation in July 2022 to our feedback on our own EDI strategy across UKRI. We have received over 300 responses to it, and they were very thoughtful responses, very detailed, constructive perspectives, challenging us to think more deeply, indicating actually where we'd managed to get the strategy right and what needed to change. So we're really grateful to people who took the time to feedback on the UKRI strategy. We're basically in UKRI now working to reshape the first edition of that strategy, and we hope to publish that very soon. But in parallel with UKRI activity, we have also in the individual research councils been thinking about what are the challenges and problems that we face in the equality, diversity and inclusion space, and how can we address them. And NERC has taken this very seriously, I think, and a multi-pronged approach at the moment. So the first thing that we did, many of you will probably be aware of, is that we held roundtables with our community where we asked for feedback on areas that we think are crucial that NERC can look to improve upon. So aspects of research culture, fieldwork, for example, is very specific to NERC. What do we do with our data? How do we make it transparent? How do we make it useful for us to understand what changes are possible? And that series of roundtables, which was published in this report on the right-hand side of the slide, then has informed our living action plan, which is, there's an image for it on the left-hand side of the slide. And there are specific actions in that plan that we want to implement to try and help make change in the diversity of our community and the diversity of NERC as an organisation. So we want to be more open and accountable. We want to ensure equity and diversity through funding and grants. We want to provide leadership appropriate to our remit, and in doing so engage with the community through, for example, events like this. And we also in our own organisation are trying to improve our own diversity as well. So those of you, I'm sure that this audience will be very much aware of our action plan, called a living action plan, because we want to be able to reflect on its progress and bring in change to the action plan as required. I'm sure that you'll be aware of it, and if you're not, please have a look at it. And then the other aspect that you can explore as well is that we're trying to make more data publicly available. And those of you who haven't followed the link on this Tableau, where you can explore grant funding allocations to councils, you can explore investigator status, whether it's a principal investigator, a co-investigator or a fellowship, and you can look at the changes over time. This is all part of being more open and transparent. Can I have the next slide, please? The other aspect is that we have tried to encourage our...
Yeah.
Try to encourage our...
Oh, I
Sorry,
thought you were going to go into the main thing. Okay, yeah, yeah.
We tried to basically...
Right.
Sorry about that. I'm getting a bit of low bandwidth, and there's some noise in the background. We have realised actually that making change can probably be most effective if we actually try and target those that are involved in the recruitment of PhD students as well. So we last year in January 2022 published an expectation of training grant holders to think about how they can adopt best practices to trying to improve the diversity of people who are interested in applying to PhD studentships, and also the processes they use to then select those that are successful in being awarded a PhD scholarship. And we're going to return back to those training grant holders this year and look to see whether they're thinking about what is best practice can actually increase the diversity of those that are coming into environmental science at the graduate level. Can I have the next slide, please? And then the other aspect of this multi-pronged approach that we've taken is actually to try and provide opportunity for those who are most experts, those of effectively you in our community, to take an area that you think is important in increasing diversity and creating a more inclusive system, and effectively bring your critical thinking to produce excellent research outcomes. And the event today is about hearing feedback from some of you on what you've done with that funding, and I guess your suggestions for how we proceed in the future as well. So we haven't been able to ask everyone that received funding to talk, which is unfortunate, but we have received documentation from you where you provided us with feedback on how we should proceed from this point, and we're looking at that. I think that's the last slide. I'm sorry, I can't quite remember when I'm not taking them forward myself. Yes, that's our last slide. So in essence, this is a way of saying that we are taking it very seriously, that we are trying to tackle the issue of the lack of diversity that there is in environmental sciences. People who have received funding and the people who are listening because they want to learn more about it are all part of this community that are trying to make these changes. And for these reasons, we're actually very grateful. So I'm going to hand back to Lisa, I think, with apologies actually for the lack of bandwidth that I have at the moment, which is, in my opinion, make this a little bit clunky. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan. That was great. So I'm delighted to be joined in this first session by speakers from 4 of the projects that focused on inclusivity in fieldwork. And our first speaker is Linda York from Bangor University, who's going to be talking about the Cultivate project. Thank you, Linda.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. So hopefully I'll do this correctly and it'll all work. She says, I can't see my presenter view now. Can you see that, Lisa? Sorry.
Yep, that's perfect. Thank you. If you
Awesome.
yeah, perfect.
Yeah, brilliant. So yeah, thanks very much for the invite. I'm going to talk about the Cultivate project. It's not a fancy acronym. It was all about growing an inclusive teaching environment. I ran this project as the PI with my 2 co-Is, Dr. Liz Hurrell and Dr. Simon Hutchison, who are from the University of York and the University of Salford, respectively. So I'm just going to talk through what we did effectively. So this came on the back of the hackathon that we had 3 weeks running before we could apply. And at the end of that sort of hackathon phase, we had 2 things. We kind of had a sort of proto output, a website that kind of tried to pull together a lot of what we were thinking in terms of digital tech and inclusion. But also we had cultivated an advisory group, and that's kind of how we planned to run our project, was that the 3 of us would kind of have key responsibilities for a work package each, and then we'd have our advisory group to go back to. I should say my focus is very much teaching, and the project's focus was very much about undergraduate teaching and getting more sort of inclusion and accessibility through different ways of doing teaching. And obviously we took the digital approach. It kind of came on the back of the fact that, you know, the pivot to online and the pandemic really forced a lot of academics to think about actually what we could do to make fieldwork much more inclusive. Suddenly things that we hadn't done became much more sort of apparent. And that was our kind of primary role. How could we really explore digital tools, and how might they, you know, open up sort of that fieldwork practice for everybody to ensure that we could all go along. So our plan effectively, as you can see just on my sort of main screen, was that we'd initially start with a sort of data gathering event, really to kind of, I suppose, get the state of where everybody was. So we want to focus mainly on academic staff and some key stakeholders. So we're working with sort of Black geographers, IEMA, so the Institute for Environmental Management, Time for Geography, which is a sort of school level focus group, the Royal Geographical Society is our sort of other stakeholders, and we ran effectively a participatory workshop where we were focusing on sort of 3 key themes that we wanted to explore. And we ran it during the day. We did it online. We had obviously hoped to do it in person, but rules were slightly not conducive to that, and Wales have slightly different rules to the rest of the UK at that time. So we ran it online. Our key sort of idea was really to pick up on personal experiences and kind of, you know, the perceptions of EDI and fieldwork. So what had we personally experienced? This was partly because we wanted to explore that idea of storytelling and how storytelling can be quite powerful in terms of sharing experiences. And really getting into that idea. We really wanted to explore what digital technology existed out there, you know, what were people using and how were people sort of using that digital technology. And finally, we finished off thinking about, you know, what were the best practices that currently existed, what had been developed, or what were people sort of doing within their own teaching. And the idea was that from this sort of big day, obviously we recorded all the sessions, we had ethics, for this as well, transcribe all the information. We could use that to populate what we had proposed, which was to develop a project workshop that was about creating a hub, a share hub, we called it, where people could look at this, get different ways of doing it, but also we wanted to create a booklet of 10 ways to, as a way of helping people kind of think about how they could bring in EDI and fieldwork. So that was kind of our sort of main sort of data gathering event. That was in February. Between February and May, we worked on all the information. We pulled together a sort of a new proto website that kind of had stories that were gathered from the first sessions. We put together some sort of digital guides, you know, how to do particular things. And we had a sort of incipient 10 ways to booklet. And the idea of the second event, and we did hold that in person, everyone came to Bangor, and we got a range of people. So this time we were looking not only to work with academics and key stakeholders, but we wanted to get sort of PGRs in, we wanted to get sort of edu developers, we wanted to get sort of students. It was slightly at the wrong time of year to try and get some undergraduate students in, but we did manage. And the idea for that session really was kind of to pull apart what we'd produced, which sort of sounds slightly contrary, but we kind of had this booklet we produced, and we allowed staff, participants, sorry, to deconstruct. We literally had the scissors out to kind of cut it up and refashion it. So we weren't afraid of kind of getting sort of key feedback. We also ran a session in there with a sort of graphical artist that was helping people think about how they would design a virtual trip themselves, which was quite interesting, and actually getting people to do work was quite positive. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So they were kind of our two sort of big things, what we did, what we produced, and obviously at the end of it you can see we have a project website that's live, and we have a 10 ways to booklet. It's bilingual, again, because I work in Wales. We have a Welsh English version of that booklet that we've been disseminating out to different groups, but also it's downloadable from our website. And then, so what did we learn? So I tried to put this in 3 different forms. So initially, I kind of want to talk about the EDI, because obviously that was quite a big focus. And actually what came out of the initial workshops was very much that, you know, when we're addressing EDI, it must be a ground up movement. It can't be sort of imposed from above. There's no point in creating a policy that just becomes a tick box exercise. So it was really interesting to hear people, you know, thinking about that. What we also kind of found is that there's lots of good practice out there, but we're also in our own little groups. Like, it's quite easy for geographers just to be in a group talking to geographers, or the geologists just to be working with geologists, etc., etc. You know, so part of that is how do we actually break that kind of siloed working? And I'm still not sure we have 100% of the ideas there. Obviously, it was more than just, I think, EDI. Initially, everyone came at it thinking about how do we make this more inclusive and accessible for our students, for our undergraduates. But what came out quite strongly was that actually, how do we make that more inclusive and accessible and fair for actually the staff that are putting together field trips? And what we really found it sort of quite interesting was that it wasn't just about, you know, how could you make a site accessible to students by creating a virtual trip or a sort of exercise, so that you kind of maybe took away some of the anxiety, but also how did we ensure that, you know, it was fair for staff that were doing this? Did they have the time? Did they have the credit for it? You know, how is the workload model addressing this? So there was some interesting sort of bigger picture came out of it. I think we're still a long way from where we need to be, and I think that was felt strongly across all of the people we spoke to and have subsequently sort of engaged with. And, you know, we do need a way of getting this information out to the wider community, because at the moment it's quite a self-selecting community rather than a kind of bring everybody together, which is obviously what we want to do. And I think the other thing in terms of EDI, it's not just about HEIs. The reason why IEMA were interested, they obviously work with sort of professional environmental sort of scientists, is actually the workplace is quite interested. And also we've had a lot of teacher interest sort of from the secondary and the primary level, which quite surprised me as well. In terms of the Digitech, There was a nice quote from Naomi Holmes, who was working on a different EDI project, but she came to one of our sessions. And I think it kind of captured it. It's that central point, use the digital to enable the experiential. And I think what we found is, although we'd initially thought we were going to do more about the digital tools, what came out was that actually it was more about the EDI, and that the tools were just a way of getting at that. I think there was a lot of concern in the community that we shouldn't be in a kind of arms race in terms of who's got the best bit of EDI, sort of virtual trip, or who's doing, something better. There was definitely a real thought that we need to be working more together as a community. And I think as academics, we are quite good at sharing what we do. But again, it comes back to that point. How do we get everybody on board? Pedagogy, it's something that I think about and the team thinks about quite a lot, but, it's not just about creating this wonderful virtual tool or virtual trip. If it's not helping students engage with the learning, then actually what's the point of it? And then finally, just something that maybe because I come and the team come from a physical sciences background, in terms of participatory projects, we found we did really have to have a tight focus. That's why we had 3 key aspects we were doing actually on both of the days that we worked with people. I think, we did really have to go out and sort of tap people on the shoulder and try and pull people in through various sort of different ways. But what we found with those sort of projects, and getting people and groups together, even on the sort of online and in person, is that it did allow that opportunity for really open and frank discussions and that sharing of practice. It kind of comes back to that storytelling that I talked about at the get-go, that it was, it was useful to share experiences, and somebody had experiences of working with one particular group, for example, that were hard of hearing and actually had talked about issues of actually the difference between US and UK British Sign Language, which, something that not everybody had thought about. So that was really important. But just to sort of move on to my last slide. So just in terms of, I think, what we'd like to share, and I think I've sort of said it already, you really do have to, we found, reach out to the community. There's so much good practice out there, but it really does sit in almost obscure places. That we need to find a better way of working together. And like I say, we've come from very much from an undergraduate kind of perspective, but actually a lot of what we're doing, if you get the undergraduate stuff right, it feeds into getting more students into PGR positions. It feeds more into getting researchers. I think it does feed back down the pipeline as well. That's something we're quite conscious about, is actually making sure we do sort of connect with it with a secondary level. We do need to find a better way, it's great that we've created this booklet and this website, but, we've done a lot to push it. But actually, I still think, that relies on keen people finding it. Obviously we work with RGS, etc. So, that is quite an important bit. I think the bottom-up approach, like I say, this is not going to be solved by an imposition from above. So, it does need this grassroots movement that comes from academics and practitioners who are really keen. I think one of the positive things that we did was to create a community of practice, and that fact that we've got lots of different groups now across different institutions that actually are still talking and we're still connected and we're still bouncing ideas off each other, I think was really important. One of the real sort of positives actually from doing the participatory workshops, and then we went and did a couple of conferences this summer, was that we were able to develop a way of engaging with staff, and that idea of giving people things to do. So, initially in our session, we had people cut things up. We gave them kind of problems to solve. In the same way, we've developed a sort of participatory workshop that we're sharing within our own institutions at the moment that gets colleagues thinking about what potentially are the issues. And, it sounds really simple, but actually we were so impressed at how much buy-in we got when we just presented them with photographs of situations and scenarios and the things that people thought were issues that they wouldn't have thought of had we just said, tell us what a problem is in your field teaching. it's definitely about co-creation. Like I say, we've worked very closely with a lot of different people, and it's not just co-creation from an academic sense, but getting, you know, that buy-in from students, getting the buy-in from industry. You know, we're all quite connected. And I think probably just my last point, you know, because as you can see them all, but don't be afraid to rip up your ideas. I think that's something we found. We had an idea of how we were going to be. And I think by the end of it, we realized that that's not actually what it ended up being. So I think I'll stop on that point. I think I'm right on the money, I hope.
Thank you, Linda. That's fantastic. Really good to hear about some of those strong participatory approaches, and also really interesting reflections on sharing across the community. That's great. Thank you. So our next speaker is Anna McGregor, who's going to be talking about the Find a Science Birth project. Thank you, Anna.
Hi there, just give me a second to share my screen. Here we go. Hopefully you can all see that okay.
Yeah, if you'd like to put in, yeah, fantastic.
Great, super. Thanks so much. And actually this is a very nice lead on to that secondary transition that Linda just mentioned. So I'm pleased to be able to talk on behalf of quite a big team on a project that we did through this funding call called Find a Science Birth. And the goal of this was to connect underrepresented groups in marine science with available birth on scientific research vessels. And I do want to particularly acknowledge Ben Fisher, Kate Hendry, Baiko Mass, and Ella Darlington for their contributions on this project. So in marine science, offshore fieldwork is quite a barrier to
I was just thinking, I think you do need to have something right at the beginning just to say hello of some greeting of some sort.
Hello, sorry. Was that to me?
No, I think one of the speakers must have their
Okay.
ask everyone else to mute. Anna, don't worry about it. It wasn't for you.
Great. So basically, offshore in marine science, offshore fieldwork is a skill set that's really hard to replicate otherwise. Yet there's a large barrier because this research is done through large vessels and it's quite expensive. So it's limited to specific networks. So what we were aiming to do was try to connect up available births on those research vessels with people who needed that experience, who couldn't get it another way. And if you look, there's a plot here about average usage of births over the past 30 years. And you can see about 25% of the births are available on average on these scientific research vessels. So they will go and do the field work regardless of whether they're at full capacity. So what we did was we added software to the existing planning portal. So all of these ships are centrally managed through quite a number of countries, one of which being the UK. To coordinate these research expeditions. So what we did is put together a system, both in terms of the software that interfaces with this MFP, as well as an application scoring system to try to have applicants ready for these ships when they were ready to leave for their research cruises. So this is just a small, don't worry about reading the details too much, but this is what the MFP looks like. So every cruise is listed and you can search by time, by location, departure location. But what we did was we worked with the software engineers to add in a section where you could see how many berths are available on each of those vessels. And then we also added in an application system where people can essentially check a box and then fill out this application, which consists of a 500-word statement, not based on previous experience. A lot of the application systems that have been developed relate to how much experience people have for fieldwork of this type. But because we're trying to find people who don't have that experience, we needed to come up with another way of getting those people onto these available berths. So we also did some surveys with chief scientists. So the chief scientist is the person ultimately in charge of the research crews. And so we surveyed them about how they support experience, what networks they use, and how they found people in the past when they had available berths on previous vessels. So this is then sort of the final selection. So after chief scientists have, well, after surveying the chief scientists, we put together sort of a top 3 selection criteria area. And the other key phase here is the cruise program review board. Basically will score all those applications based on 4 main areas, which are shown here. Again, not based on the amount of field skills applicants have, but things that they can bring to the cruise, their motivation and their future potential. So we had considerable interest in this and quite a lot of support both within the UK and internationally about wanting to try it out and wanting to get involved in it. And what makes this really work is the fact that there is a centrally planned cruise system, the Marine Facilities Planning Portal, and also the framework around it. So there is a central group reviewing these cruises, a central way of administering them. So it allowed us to tap into what's currently being done and bring in applicants without connections with these networks. And what's really important to this is both the need for field skills and also engaging with these networks. So bringing people who might not have those networks to start with into them is really key. One thing we've also learned is that timing is very important. And actually that's proving to be one of the tricky parts of this. These cruises are planned and released twice a year. And so making sure the applicants are available for review at those times, and also then connecting up available people when the cruisers are ready to go, because there's a lot of sort of final details that need to be evaluated prior to the cruises departing. We also are hoping to build in sort of links with other financial support programs. So this is really about being on the ship for the research cruise, but there are a lot of associated costs, which we also recognize as barriers to participating in this type of experience. So things like travel to destination points, medical certifications, and even PPE can all be add up. But we actually have had a lot of interest in other funding schemes and other ways of trying to sort of reduce that barrier as we go along. So what we can share, and so hopefully, so the portal is pretty much ready. We're kind of working out some of the last details about just distributing it. And we certainly are happy to share what we've learned through the application process, trying to favor people without field experience, whereas lots of applications processes already focus on field experience. And hopefully at some point after we do get some applicants onto ships, we can share the cruise reports, because we would like to sort of see what difference that has made in terms of their ability to gain experience towards their career. We have connections. So this team met through the Challenger Society for Marine Science, which is a professional society for marine scientists. And their working group has done quite a bit to recognize and try to promote areas of inclusion and diversity. We're also looking to Incredible Oceans is a sort of public engagement organization done sort of England way, but we're looking to, and they have agreed to sort of partner with us to disseminate the tool once available. Because one of the things is, again, getting outside the usual networks of people who have access to ocean-going research. So we are going to hoping to work with the National Oceanography Center and also MASTS to try to reach a wider range of applicants for this. So people that have projects that would be able to carry them out, but they don't have access to ships are kind of the target audience we're looking for. So that's where we're going from here. And we're really happy to share what we've learned throughout this course of this project.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Anna. Really nice to hear about opening up those cruises to a much wider group of people. Fantastic. So it's a pleasure to welcome our next speakers, who are Zara Pattison, Laura Brunholtz, and Bryony Carlin from the University of Newcastle. We're going to be talking about safety and inclusion in field-based environmental sciences.
Hi everyone, thanks. I'll just get this up and running. Okay, so yeah, so it's myself, Zara from Newcastle, and I've got Bryony and Laura, who are the fantastic postdocs on this project that will be jumping in, and a number of other collaborators, to say that we are from a lot of varied environments. So we've got geography, arts and culture, environmental sciences here as well. You know, environmental sciences is super unique in terms of what it offers us as a career, and fieldwork is definitely one of those massive career pluses, in my view anyway. You get to travel all over the world if you're lucky. You also get to travel to places in the UK as a UK-based researcher that are truly spectacular that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. But there are a lot of hidden challenges, and I say hidden. I know that there's a lot of work being done in the States on trying to raise awareness on issues faced by marginalized researchers, you know, as well as female researchers as well, that go out and do field work. And there's some fantastic good practice coming out of there. I started my career as an academic about 3 years ago as a lecturer. And I remember my first meeting with a senior academic male who sat down with our very young PhD student and said, right, it's time for you to go sit on the top of this mountain in the UK on your own in a tent by a river for 3 weeks. And I was absolutely horrified. And then after a lot of ranting with colleagues, this EDI call came out, and I thought, this is a fantastic opportunity for us to raise awareness of what is actually happening with UK-based researchers. So our target audience was, you know, PhD, postgrad, and lecturer level and above, going out doing fieldwork and some of the experiences that they're having. Our aim was to raise awareness for this, create a almost like a data repository of experiences, and we did that in various ways. And I'll leave on for Bryony and Laura to talk through that. So this is what we did.
Thanks, Zara. Yes, so as Zara mentioned, we're an interdisciplinary team of researchers, and we comprise some environmental scientists and some humanities scholars and some geographers. And so we were interested in creating an evidence base that had quantitative and qualitative data. So we could have those sort of statistics, but also more insights into people's lived experiences. And we did this in a number of ways. We developed a survey with different quantitative and qualitative questions that was reviewed by some peers in our university as well as the project team. And we had 102 responses to that survey. We also did 11 interviews with field-based environmental science researchers of different career stages, and also who identified with quite diverse sort of identity groups. And they've been transcribed. It's about 20 hours of interviews. And we also organised a workshop for sharing the results we were finding so far. This took place in May, but also gathering more evidence through that sort of coming together and sharing stories. And yeah, we found that it actually took a long time to develop a methodology for collating evidence that was ethical and that was sensitive to the experiences of the researchers that we were asking to contribute to our project. And then we sort of analysed all of this data from a couple of different ways, drawing on the different sort of interdisciplinary skill set in the team. We sort of sifted it into some different barriers to inclusion and participation, some risks to safety and well-being, and also different experiences of discrimination, marginalization, and harassment relating to fieldwork that had been experienced by the many researchers that contributed to our study. Laura, would you like to talk about the results a little?
Yeah, thanks, Bryony. So yeah, what we learned from this, well, we basically generated a wealth of not only data, but also stories about the lived experiences of researchers in field-based environmental sciences. So we're sharing here some of the sort of key results, but this is only sort of a snapshot of what we've learned so far, and we're still developing some of the results of this. One of the key things was just the proportion of the people that responded to our online survey that had faced some different types of harassment, discrimination, or violence during their research, field-based research experience. So about 41% said that they had faced identity-based verbal harassment. 47%, and then around 38% said that they'd experienced verbal sexual harassment. Less people had experienced physical sexual assault or physical harassment, but obviously any response of yes is too many responses. So on that figure here that Zara is sharing is orange is saying that they had experienced that, and purple was saying that no, they hadn't. And then there's also 2 shades of grey, either for identifying that they weren't sure if they'd experienced any of those discrimination, harassment, or violence, and then preferring not to say. So another question that we asked of people was how these experiences of discrimination, harassment, and violence had affected their feelings about their research and career. So again, on this next figure, orange indicates yes, the yellow, creamy yellow is maybe, and no is in purple, and I don't know is in grey. But in this, we can see that 48% of respondents said that their experiences of discrimination, harassment, or violence had influenced the way that they conducted their research. Around 19% said that it had actually discouraged them from carrying out further field work, and 8% of respondents said that they had considered changing their career based on their experiences. Next figure, Zara. Sorry.
I know, sorry. Brian, talk through some of the interview responses.
Oh yeah, sorry, Brian, you would do.
Yeah, that I mean, it really sort of echoed the statistical data that we acquired from the survey. But something else that really came out in the interviews was the way that marginalizations are experienced by people of different intersecting identities, and how they face many sort of proportionally more challenges. There was another finding that came out of the data set as a whole from the surveys and the workshop, as well as the interviews, was that many of the people sharing their experiences with us, even if they were at a more senior career stage by the time we were speaking with them, was that they experienced sort of more vulnerability, in some cases more abuse, whilst at a more precarious career stage. So whether they were a PhD student or an early career researcher, that there was a really strong trend that researchers were more willing to compromise their safety in those vulnerable positions, and also that almost the burden of doing this EDI work fall disproportionately on the shoulders of people of marginalized identities, which is also why the policy is important. Zara, would you like to conclude?
Thank you. Sorry, I know we're doing like a three-way thing here, but I thought it was important for the people who carried out, especially the work to give their view on it. So I think I've got another slide on what we learnt, but I think it's important to show this figure as well. So in the greeny side, it's strongly agree, and brown is strongly disagree. So I think some of the, this is also echoing what Linda was saying, about we can do it bottom up, but we really do need to change some of the policies as well. You can see, just to focus on institutions, we can see that the researchers agree that the institutions don't offer enough support. So, and that fieldwork is not accessible to everybody. And this is something that we have to change. We have to change what our institutions are offering students in terms of safety and mitigation of issues that occur in the field, but we also need to make it more accessible. And to make it more accessible, we need to make it safer for everybody. Our last slide is just some good practice. This is from our workshop, and it's just, I know that there's a lot of stuff going on here, and we'll gladly share all these images as well. But to show, we need mitigation, we need the evidence. So yeah, we can turn around and say, oh, we know that these things happen in the field, but actually having these lived experiences, and hopefully we can create, I like some of the websites that who've been talking before us have been creating. We can do something like this to show these stories, offer some of the support, change the way that universities support students and researchers, and then actually take action as well. We found that, like Laura was saying earlier, that actually doing this properly, ethically, and considering the people who are answering these surveys, it did take a lot longer than we expected. And that's fine, because what we have is a good evidence base. But our next step really is to start changing the way that we write risk assessments and the way that we hold institutions accountable for the way they send students on fieldwork and what they do with students. When I say students, I mean researchers and all of us really, sorry, experiencing going out and doing fieldwork. So we've just managed to get some Newcastle funding from our institution to help carry on this work, to look at the range of risk assessments across the UK, and then how we can inform policy going forward. We definitely need some more responsibility to be taken from the institutions in how we navigate this as well. Can I just take the opportunity to thank, some of you might be in the audience, thank you for answering our survey. It was definitely a very emotional process for everybody, and we just want to say thank you, and thank you for the funding as well.
Thank you very much, all three of you. That was really interesting, and also some important and sobering issues raised there. Thank you. So our final speaker for this session is Des McDougall from the University of Worcester, who's going to be talking about using virtual fieldwork to support in-person field experiences. Des.
Thanks. Okay, good morning, everybody. This project's all about using virtual fieldwork to support the real thing. The project team comprises Linda, who presented earlier in Cultivate, and also Simon, who's also involved in that project. And before going any further, I'd also like to thank NERC for the funding. So in terms of background, I don't want to repeat what's already been said, but fieldwork is central to environmental sciences. However, recent years has witnessed a growing awareness of EDI issues associated with traditional approaches. And these include, for example, pre-fieldwork anxiety. It can affect all students, but particularly those with disabilities, both seen and unseen. Also concerns about access and logistics, for example, students wondering whether they'll be able to tackle particular walks, whether it's going up hills or anything else. And there are also, for example, problematic destinations, and that might include countries where participants are at risk due to, for example, their sexuality. There's a lot more to it than that. I focused on issues that are specifically relevant to this particular project. Now, in recognizing these issues, there's been a lot of good work published recently, and there have been conferences and workshops and strategies for addressing some of these concerns, including providing students, undergraduate or postgraduate, with more information in advance of fieldwork, and perhaps that might also include providing photos and videos of where they're going to go, and also having a kind of backup plan in case things don't go to plan, such as poor weather or access issues. It occurred to us that maybe one way to do this would be to provide virtual fieldwork, which kind of sounds like a lot more effort than just providing some photos and videos, but there are some particular advantages to doing that. And this is the basis for the more inclusive fieldwork project. Before going any further, because virtual fieldwork means different things to different people, I just want to be clear about what I mean here. This is an example of what I mean by virtual fieldwork. It's immersive. We can just about get away with calling it virtual reality because it provides the viewer with some autonomy where to look in on, to move around, as we're kind of doing there. So that's just to be clear, it's ground level virtual fieldwork rather than some Google Earth fly through or anything else, and these have their place. But I'm being quite limited in what I mean by virtual fieldwork here. So let's get back to the presentation. So we've created a website, and that includes that and making the case section, and that's really important. It's about arguing why we should use virtual fieldwork or the benefits for all students, and that's a key part of this approach. It's not creating virtual field trips for 2 or 3 students. It's creating virtual field trips for the whole cohort. These virtual field trips can be used before fieldwork to prepare them. It can be used afterwards to revisit. And it can also be used as a plan B as well, if you've got issues with weather. And that making the case section is very important. We've also provided guidance, which is still a work in progress, on supporting and creating virtual field trips. And just as important as the actual technical side is the pedagogic side. Pedagogy trumps technology. That's very important. And of course, we've provided free stuff here as well. We've provided for free 5 virtual field trips, 3 coastal and 2 to upland environments, just to show you the type of resources that can be produced. We've also got workshops. That's slightly cheeky under what we've done so far, because we haven't done them yet. They are scheduled for early December. We're having to rearrange one because of the industrial action, but emails will go out to participants by the end of today. Also, there's been conferences. We've been trying to disseminate in other ways as well. There's quite a lot of work still to do here, I think. We've still got work to do on our website. We've got articles, one we're about to submit, another one that's it's still in process we're writing. We've offered departmental support to 5 departments, which seems a bit random, but the idea here is to firstly manage our own workloads, and secondly, just to try and get 5 to begin with, and then see whether we can bring about effect change locally in courses. And finally, we're aiming to create a community of practice. As Linda said earlier, it's really about people working together across institutions, taking advantage of strengths in different places and sharing resources if we can do that. So in terms of what we've learned, it was an ambitious timeline. So we're not finished. We're aware of that. We're still working on it. Build it and they will come. No, they won't, not necessarily. So it's clear to us that HE is a very noisy environment. Everybody's shouting. We're trying to get our messages out there. What's really important here is about getting the message out there and providing an effective sales pitch for impact. Some people might recoil at that. That's a terminology, but that's a reality. We've got good resources here. We want to work with people. That's about getting the message out there. And it's really fundamentally about people and relationships. In terms of good practice, I don't have a slide for that because the project's not finished. I'm not quite sure what the good practice would be just yet. I think it'll come back to working with people and some of the things that Linda said a bit earlier. If you're interested to find out a little bit more about this project, there is a website. There's always a website, isn't there? And there's also online workshops. We're going to run quite a few. So still plenty to do, but we're very upbeat about it. And yeah, happy to answer any questions. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Des. That was really interesting. And I really like this idea of using technology to support in-person field experiences. Fantastic. Thank you. So we've got about 20 minutes for some questions and answers. And Maraki, I believe you've been monitoring those and you're ready to ask our panel some of those questions. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Our speakers have been amazing at answering questions already. They've answered 15 already, which is fantastic. We've got a few more though. So I will start with Linda in two kind of interrelated questions. So Linda, you mentioned you had to tap on people to pull them in from different areas. Can you elaborate on how you did this? Because colleagues are saying that it's not easy bringing in people from very different areas.
Yeah, no, we did. So some people, I think we sort of knew through sort of, Twitter profiles and things like that Black geographers, I knew sort of through Twitter and things like that. Obviously, RGS I was quite well connected with, but we tried to sort of get the word out. So the RGS, I'm also the chair of the RGS Geography and Education Research Group, which sort of played a little bit, I suppose, into sort of hand, because we could, raise profiles that way. We tried to post it in sort of lots of different places. We used LinkedIn, we used Twitter, we used sort of RGS profile. Some of it was sort of word of mouth as well. We knew a lot of people had been working on sort of this. So it was a case of sending out emails to people as well, personal invites. So we tried a few different ways. So personal connections, the usual kind of social media channels, and then those more professional sort of organizations that kind of had sort of that bigger sort of profile, because we knew we couldn't reach everybody. You still can't reach everybody, but yeah, just trying to use the network that we had that had a bigger reach than us personally. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you, Lisa. There's a little bit of a nuanced one that's kind of linked to that. You talked about good practice, but you mentioned that good practice is siloed. And colleagues were wondering if there are other sort of environmental science fora that across disciplines that could be used to talk about EDI and environmental sciences. So did you come across any other groups?
Yeah, so JOLSOC have done some really good stuff, and they have, I always forget what the acronym is. I'm sure I saw Sam Giles on this, and she probably knows the name of the JOLSOC acronym, which escapes me at the moment, but they've been active for quite a long time. They've been doing some really good stuff. There's a group that sprung up sort of in the US for a while, the ED group. In fact, they've got a conference simultaneously going on at the same time that this is going on. Some of it is just sort of good practice within individual institutions. So, we talked to Leslie Batty, who obviously I think Sam works with as well. Birmingham are doing a lot of good individual practice, like, Des at Worcester. Sometimes it's just individuals sort of doing stuff. So that's part of the issue, is sometimes, we're in our own little disciplinary, like say we're a geographer or we're an environmental scientist, or, even the archaeologists. I think it's on our original proto where we kind of created a Trello site. I can't quite remember now if it's on our main site. It must be, but like the archaeologists have been doing quite a lot of work, because again, field work, you think we're all sort of on the geosciences here, but actually archaeologists do a lot of field work. Biosciences, again, it's sometimes it's just coming out of research papers rather than, that form of sharing, rather than being a specific sort of hub that we try to create. So there is a lot of good stuff out there. Some of it's hidden in institutions, and we only know about it because they talk to us. And some of it is just coming out of research papers. And that's what we tried to do, was pull together a lot of that and put it on our hub. So yeah, that's what we tried to do.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much. I'll move on to Zara, Bryony, and Laura. Colleagues, were you surprised by some of the results in your surveys and interviews?
Hi.
Hi, Zara. Hi, no worries.
To be honest, it's been like a very emotional journey for all of us. I'd like to say that I wasn't surprised. You know, I was actually surprised that I know that we had a small sample set. You know, I think I wrote there's a lot of caveats with our database. You know, most of the respondents were female, most of the respondents were white, and you can imagine that, I suppose, if this is something that has happened to you or something that you're passionate about, you're more likely to answer the survey, perhaps. So, but I still, like, you know, sorry, I'm being very incoherent here, but it's so important. We had, like, when we did the workshop, we had people who deal with, like, at the university level, deal with the risk assessments and stuff. And they were sitting there listening to amazing people who were sharing their experiences. And I mean, like, you know, this is your job. And it's like these things that are happening to people. It's so emotional. And they're saying, well, oh, we never knew this happened. And you're like, but you're the ones that are writing the risk assessments and the university policy. How can you not know this is happening? So even if it's just 1 or 2 people that this has happened to, something is not right at the university level. It can't all just be about legislation, or, like, you know, we spoke once about why are things not connecting between researchers and implications for the universities or institutions when a researcher gets, I'm taking the most extreme examples here, sexually harassed. Well, oh, because there's no litigation, or there's nothing that's going to actually hold someone accountable. Like, it's not good enough. So even though there's amazing studies that are being done and raising awareness of this, and I've had people say, oh, well, this has already been done. We know that this stuff happens, but it's still happening. So if we can just keep creating the evidence, and now to start moving on to how we're going to hold universities responsible, or institutions, not just unis, I think that's the next very big and very challenging step. And I know that I diverged from your question, I'm sorry, and I'm a bit emotional, but thank you. It's just having the platform is so important. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. I'll actually stay with you, Sarah, if that's all right. It says, someone is asking, is saying, would be good to be able to study the findings in more detail. What are your plans to publish, perhaps even take to international conferences?
Yes, so I think we've got Laura. So obviously, remembering that this ended in May, we managed to get some internal funding to extend Bryony's contract till the end of June. But obviously, you know, Laura and Bryony are now on their own journeys. So we have got papers drafted. So Laura's working on the quantitative paper with the results, and Bryony is using her background alongside Tina, who has a lot of her very strong background in intersectional justice, environmental justice, to actually write the qualitative statements, trying to look a bit deeper into why these things are maybe not being recognized, and where there's the disconnect between, you know, what's happening on the ground and with what's happening with institutions. So it's a little bit slower, but it's because we're all kind of working for free on this now. The next step is that we've got some institutional money alongside Louise Maye's money for her fellowship to try and do this part of the work that we wanted to do, but we didn't have time because of the kind of ethical and emotional part of the surveys, is to now we're collating risk assessments across the UK. So if you've got risk assessments from your institutions, please email us so that we can see it. We want to do a review of these, look at where there are disparities, look at what works and what doesn't work, and then create this profile. We're doing a workshop at the British Ecological Society next month, and hopefully working with them to publish some policies. And we want to work with as many of you as possible to get this out there. So please contact us, and I will stop taking up all the space. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Next, we've got a question for Des. Des, how long does it take to build a virtual environment?
Oh, that's a great question. It depends what you're wanting to do, but the short answer is I can put something together I might have a day spent in the field, and then it might be another day or two afterwards. In detail, it depends what you do, and there's no one sole way to actually put together some of these resources. So when anybody asks me, I say I try to find out a little bit more about what their interests are, how fussy they are about things, how technical they are, and what their budgets are as well. And it comes back to me, I do think it's worth collaborating, sharing resources. So if you've got somebody at another university who quite likes virtual field trip development, but you've got some other research or some good pedagogic ideas, come together. I think that's the way forward. But yeah, you can do something in a couple of days.
Wow, thank you very much, Des. I think we've got a question here for Susan or Lisa. It says most people on this call are already aware of a lot of these issues, and many of the people that wouldn't attend an EDI event won't know or care, perhaps. What are NERC are planning to do to make sure that everyone in the NERC community engages with this research and the outputs and can't remain ignorant of them?
Yeah, thanks, Sam and Maraki, for raising the question. Sam, we are wondering that ourselves. I can tell you what we are trying to do to ensure that people are on board with our ambitions to make environmental science more diverse, which is that any visit that we do to HEIs, we have now several slides in the slide pack that is very specifically about our actions and our ambitions. And I always make the point of actually asking the HEI that we visit for what they're doing as well, if that's not been forthcoming in the information that they share with us. We also have recorded this, and we have a community update webinar happening on, I think it's the 5th of December, where it's actually updating the community on changes that we're making to the system around things, for example, like reviewing. There's a lot of interest in it. I would actually use that forum as well to indicate to people that this is something that we consider equally to be as important and direct people towards the webinar. So at the moment, it's still a very strong encouragement to engage, and we see in the HEI visits that it is moving onto people's agenda. We're not yet sure whether it's fast enough, and this is something that we'll just have to take a watching eye on. And it's very much an encouragement stage just now, for example, with funding like this. But I agree with you. I think that the people who have registered for this are the people who are interested in learning more and probably quite knowledgeable anyway, and we need to get to the other parts of the community. And of course, it's okay to ask NERC a question.
Thank you, Susan. We've got a question for Anna, Find Science Birth. Is this happening internationally elsewhere? Would this approach be transferable to other fieldwork disciplines?
Yeah, so to answer the first part of the question, we certainly have had interest internationally, and because the Marine Facilities Planning Portal is international to start with, there is the potential to do that. One of the challenges is where the applicants come from, because if they're coming from further away, you then have visa issues, and getting visas onto ships adds another level of complexity and timing, and funding as well. So those, sorry. So yes, we would absolutely love to expand this internationally. I don't know how, and I'd love to see it with other fieldwork opportunities too. I could see field courses going to certain locations, trying to, if they have available places. I think one of the challenges might be these places come up quite last minute, and also you don't have that available numbers. On a ship, how many berths are on the ship in advance, so you already kind of can expect an event, and how big the research party is with the planned research, so you have an idea in advance during the planning stage of where that availability is. So it might, and it would be great, but it is figuring out the details.
Thank you, Anna. Another one for Susan, I think. From Veronica, saying, as a woman, having worked in academia and outside academia, I could relate to many of the situations described around sexual harassment. I am aware of non-HEIs organizations working on identifying and implementing EDI best practice. Has NERC looked into analyzing and learning from those organizations that are sort of identifying and implementing best practice in this area?
Probably not directly is the answer, but where we have been convening roundtables, we have had consultants coming in that are not involved with UKRI, not employed with UKRI. So in some ways are independent, and these consultants have also been involved in advising us how we might construct, for example, the roundtable. So I guess the answer is that we're doing it indirectly, not directly, and we can certainly take that thinking away in terms of how we might proceed in the future.
Thank you, Susan. There is a question just come in. Oh, it's disappeared. Okay, fine. There was a question earlier on about the use of those. Some of the presentations had very visual outcome-based slides that colleagues will find really useful if they can use them and advocate and celebrate those findings and sort of advocate for these pieces of work in the community. I can't answer this, so if colleagues can just put something in the chat that they are happy to share those diagrams, that would be great. We don't have any other questions, but I wanted to say that a lot of our panelists have answered a lot of questions in the chat, and a lot of other colleagues have also put ideas, links, and suggestions in the chat and in the Q&A. So if you wouldn't mind having a look at that as well. So no more questions for the time being, Lisa.
Thank you very much, Maraki, and thank you to all of our speakers in this first session. Some really interesting work, great to hear about it. We'll now be taking a break until 11:15. So if you'd like to rejoin us for our second session then, and thank you very much. I'll see you then.
Lisa,
yes.
It's 11:15. It is 11:15.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, we'll be taking a break now at 11:15, and we'll be rejoining at 11:35. So a 20-minute break. Thank you. Thanks, Susan.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, everyone.
So welcome back, everyone, to our second session, where we have speakers from a wide range of projects focusing on how to open up environmental science to a broader community, improving diversity in postgraduate training and research, and decolonising the curriculum. So I'd like to invite our first speakers to present, who are Pallavi Anand, Francis Apaya, Jessica Gagnon, and Peter Butts, who are going to be talking about the EDAL project. Thanks, folks.
Thank you so much. We're really excited to be able to talk about EDAL today. The four of us are presenting on behalf of our larger team with EDAL, so I do want to make sure to give credit out to the entire team for EDAL, and I've put in the chat our website as well, so you can see more about who we are and what we have been doing for the EDAL project. So EDAL is evaluating community diversity and inclusion within the geochemistry academic ladder. And one of the things that we did right away when the project was funded was launch our website, and Dr. Botts created our logo and set up our project email. And actually that allowed us to engage with an interested network of folks, those interested in our project. In fact, many of our visitors to our site visited our site more than 10 times. So more than half of our visitors came at least twice. And almost 300 of our visitors visited more than 10 times. So I think that helped us build interest in our project. We developed and launched our community survey after undergoing thorough ethical approval, thorough ethical review. So the survey launched in March and April, and we had 156 responses to the survey representing geochemists across the academic ladder, from PhD student through to senior leaders in geochemistry. We were also able to conduct 6 pilot interviews as a way to gauge what follow-on or future research could explore, examining both qualitative and quantitative data. So it allowed us to look at the data holistically. We also presented at led two presentations at the European Geoscience Union General Assembly in Vienna, one led by Dr. Maders and one led by our PI, Dr. Anand. And we have a number of blog posts as well that we've already put out from the project, and I'll put that in the chat as a way to, again, make clear the work that needs to be done. This is a short-term project. I think, as a lot of colleagues have said in the first part of today, that the limitations of a short-term 6-month project meant that we could only sort of touch the surface on what could be done with EDI. And I hope that collectively all of our projects show that a lot more work needs to be done, but also a lot more time and funding needs to be contributed to that. So that was the first part of what did we do. Any other contributions, Pallavi or Peter, to first slide? Without that, then we'll move on to Dr. Appiah.
All right, thank you, Jessica. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, NERC, for the project, funding of the project, and all the things we've done. Few things we have learned, which is key. Most of the things have been talked about, but looking at the very key intersectional characteristics of our respondents, we received 204, and then based on the criteria that we set, and also the qualifications to enter into analysis, we were able to clean up the data and analyze 156 respondents. And looking at ethnicity, basically gives the same outlook, similar outlook regarding even the larger UK population and STEM data as well. 78% white. Gender identity, looking at men, women, and also the diverse other ethnicities, identities that we can find: agender, genderqueer, non-binary. Very key, though the numbers seem that small there, but very interesting stories behind each of those. As well, looking at sexuality as well, we do now 77% straight, and the 7% bisexual, 8% involving other sexualities. Very key as well, because there are stories behind all this. 5% gay, lesbian community as well. And the other things, but few things that we want to point out and highlight within these findings that we have learned so far. We have, in terms of women who are in the academic ladder in professorial levels, we had no minority women represented there, and that is key. Also, 9.5% of PhD students in the non-binary, genderqueer, and agender, etc., have reported experiencing prejudices in one way or the other. And those are key issues that we need to look at. One key aspect as well, looking at the contract level, the academic ladder, contract and permanent staff. You could look at the fact that nearly about over 10%, nearly 26% reporting learning disability, sort of mental health issues, compared to nearly about 10%, which regarding permanent contracts. So you could see the disparities here that needs a deeper understanding what brings about such changes, and so on. And so these are key things that we just want to point out within our data. And surely, as have been highlighted already, we need to go deeper within this data. We still ongoing deeper analysis of the other aspects of the responses, and also in our interview data as well, to sort of unravel issues around such key findings that we have put forward. So I'll pass on to Dr. Jessica again to the third slide.
Thanks, Francis. So what the funding enables us to do, as far as sharing best practices that we found in the short term of the project, We are a multidisciplinary team, and we have talked a lot about the benefits of that for both this project, but also the ways that would benefit more EDI work in geochemistry. It's great to have this funding, so we really appreciate that NERC put this funding together. And for us, we represent a diversity of ethnicities and races, gender identities, able-bodiedness, sexual identities, career paths, subdisciplines. We also present both STEM and social science. So I'm a social scientist. My expertise is specifically in equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I think if we want to tackle, we've talked about this a lot, if we want to tackle EDI as an issue, it must be multidisciplinary. If we could tackle it with one discipline, it'd be done by now. But also if we could tackle it in 6 months, it would also be done by now. So I think thinking ahead for what the future should hold, I would suggest, our team would suggest follow-on funding, longer term funding, resources to really invest in change. And that would need to be a lot longer term. We talked also about EDI issues needing to be fully embedded. So our data suggests, as well as our experience on the team suggests, that this can't be add-on issues. It needs to be embedded in the work that we do. Everything from our science and engineering talks, discussions within our faculties and departments, the activities we do, it can't be a follow-on or extra. It needs to be embedded in part of the work we do. So for example, one of our team members used their platform in a particular presentation to bring in EDI into that presentation. So I think, you know, what we're talking about here is not a separation of EDI from science and engineering, but truly an embedding of it across that work. And I think that what has been said, and we will echo what has been said by colleagues earlier, that the time was a limitation. So the data we've collected, we hope will contribute to a vital understanding of where we can go from here. But the short-term limitation of the project means that there isn't an easier quick fix. And we knew that before going in. So I think it's thinking about from what we've learned, from what our colleagues have learned across the other projects, what can we do in the future to make this more embedded and what kind of long-term resources do we need to make the change happen? Because we can talk about the change, we can collect vital data to understand the change that needs to happen, but how can we implement that change is a really important part of what we'd like to contribute today. Additional add-ons, Pallavi or Peter?
Yeah, I sorry. I wanted to mention something as well, and I've been working on this project and it's been massively interesting and brilliant to do, but also very disheartening at times, because when you look, for example, at gender diversity, not just binary, but more so, you see that in the middle figure, the blue bar, that between PhD student to postdoc and research scientist, there's a massive drop, and in our respondents, it was not represented in lecture and above, or even in permanent contracts. Similarly, with LGBT representation in the academic ladder, and we've not put that in this figure here, but there's a massive drop in between PhD researchers to postdocs, to lecturers, and in our respondents, there were zero LGBTQIA plus respondents in senior leadership roles, such as professors or heads of departments. And that that's very personal for me, being myself genderqueer and a gay man. So there's something I wanted to highlight.
Thank you, Peter, and I agree. And I think for a lot of our data, as we get more senior into the respondents, you can see much less diversity and inclusion at that top level. So who's at the top, who's in leadership roles. And from a previous project I partook on, it's hard. I mean, one of our respondents in that project said something like, you can't be what you can't see. So it's really hard for those of us who are minoritized in one or more ways, whether it's sexual identity, gender identity, race, ethnicity. It's hard to imagine yourself in a senior role in the future if you see no one who shares an identity with you in those senior roles. So I think that is a key part. So thank you for adding that, Peter.
There's one thing as well that I wanted to mention, and that's on the positive side. There's a lot of the EDI work 10, 20, 30 years ago was focused on women in science and academia. And you can actually see that in the center figure that the percentage of women up until the senior leadership roles, it's not changing much, but then there's a massive drop. And I'm very much hoping that that's a legacy from 20, 30 plus years ago, and that the diversity at more junior roles up to lecturer reader, that actually will trickle down further. That's a hope, and I wanted to end on a positive note.
Thanks, Peter. Anything else, Pallavi?
Yeah, I completely agree with what have been said. And same thing is there another point which I kind of represent. There is no senior leaders in any ethnic minority woman presented across geochemistry and environmental science. So that was another finding. And it's other thing that to be noted is, although the data suggested 53% women respondents we had, there was a bit of it's not representative, I would say. I think it seems to be that more women are responding to these types of call, or people from minoritized groups are responding to these EDI surveys. So there may be a little bit, there was a question earlier on saying that, how do we bring other people to care about EDI issues? And one of the things that it was shared in the last slide is, if we could use our scientific platform to talk about EDI, we can get a captive audience to listen about science, but actually we can. So although it may not be norm, but I think in one of the conferences that I attended recently, International Conference on Palæstinography, there were a couple of minoritized groups who talked about EDI using this scientific platform, which was invited talks only. So there's something in there that we could maybe talk more about it when we get the platform. So that's all I wanted to say here. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, all four of you. I think really important to see that deep dive into geochemistry across the career stages and what that's looking like as time's going on. And thank you, Jessica, for making those points about timing and funding. I think that's something that we as NERC take on board fully, and something that we'll be thinking about as we think further about what we can make available for supporting EDI across the environmental science community. So thank you. So I'm pleased to welcome our next speakers, who are Olivia Barnett-Nakshina and Beth Roberts from the University of Exeter, who are going to be talking about the work they've been doing in the Centre for Environment and Human Health.
Thank you. Yeah, good morning. I think it's still morning. We've got about 10 minutes left. I'm in Copenhagen though, so it's afternoon here. And thank you, NERC, for the opportunity to describe this NERC-funded project, Reflections from a Centre of Environment and Human Health, what is also known to us as the REACH project. This took place in our own research centre, the European Centre for Environment and Human Health, which is an interdisciplinary research and teaching centre based in the University of Exeter Medical School. So this will be shortened to ECEHH in our slides, and we'll refer to it as the Centre or the European Centre from here in. So from January to June 2022, 3 postdoctoral fellows, Beth Roberts, an ecologist, Daniel Derbyshire, a behavioural economist, and myself, Olivia Barnett-Nakshina, an anthropologist, worked alongside the former director of the centre, Professor Laura Fleming, who works in population health, with several other academic and professional service colleagues to bring together various discussions that have been happening amongst some of us in the centre around intersectionality, diversity, and decolonisation. Questions were being asked by some members of the centre about why it was not more diverse in its staff base, as our centre is very white. To what extent is race and ethnicity considered both in the workplace and the experience of people employed at the centre, but also in the research projects that are being hosted within it? And how does the context of the centre in Cornwall impact some of these questions? A theoretical starting point for our project was inspired by Caribbean philosopher Sylvia Wynter, who argues that the concept of the human is really referring to European man. Thus, a question that provoked us was, who is the human in the European Centre of Environment and Human Health? And is the variability and who gets the privilege of being treated as fully human recognised in research and practice within the centre? Before submitting our application, we had input from two critical scholars of colour, Dr. Ria Paul, who had been part of the initial dialogue around these topics but could not participate in the project, and Dr. Adi Adelaine, an independent consultant. Based on theirs and other people's critical feedback, we sought to ensure we had a team of advisors who could speak to decolonisation, racial justice, and intersectionality from personal research and practice perspectives. Not too soon, Bev, on this slide. And who have extensive experience of dealing with whiteness in the academy. So this takes a very particular kind of expertise, particularly in dealing with the fragility and defensiveness that can come with it. So alongside our team of researchers focused on environment, economics, and health, we had scholars from medicine, political science, and education, as well as diversity and inclusion specialists and pedagogues. Without Dr. Sabiha Alouche, Dr. Malcolm Richards, Dr. Riyad Gaymor, Dr. Sheree Warmington, bosswoman Tina Verhaeg, who I think is here with us, and Dr. Maisha Reza, who's also here. So all of these people were our main advisors, and we would not have had the capacity to think through our project with the level of care that we did, and much of our own learning came from them. So thank you to all of them. Okay, over to you, Beth.
Thanks, Olivia. Upon the advice from Riyad, an education scholar, we started our meetings with check-ins as a way to get to know each other and connect beyond our academic selves and be embodied people working together. Our health and emotions were given a priority in this way, which was really just a nice way of connecting. We also agreed to have a rotating chair for each of our meetings, which meant that a different person had the power to manage the meetings from week to week. Throughout the project, we scheduled seminar speakers, and these focused on the decolonisation in relationship to the environment and health in order to bring more critical and diverse perspectives to our research centre. We critically reviewed the extent to which the centre has considered decolonial, intersectional, and anti-racist perspectives in research over the past 11 years since the centre began, by conducting a literature review of all the centre's publications. We collaboratively designed a search technique which included searching keywords, titles, and abstracts for words that related to race, ethnicity, gender, disability, and LGBTQ+. And we also looked to see what publications had included collaboration with scholars outside of Europe and the global north. We sought to consider the global power dynamics of who produces knowledge and from which locations, and to see what kinds of topics our centre researchers have covered. We assembled an annotated review of external publications about decolonising the university and research methods, including looking at Indigenous perspectives and critical race perspectives as a resource for the centre to use moving forward. We also collaborated with the Health and Environment Public Engagement Group, who hosted their own meetings to explore the impacts of colonisation and racism within Cornwall with local community members. Another method we used was to ascertain the inclusivity of the centre in a way that was safe for people without fear of repercussions. Based on a suggestion from Dr. Adi Adelaine, we used an external body to conduct this survey. We included a corporate agency who had never worked with academics before, and together we co-created an online survey and discussed how they would analyse the data on our behalf. We also conducted confidential one-to-one semi-structured interviews with researchers about their work and their lived experiences in relation to gender, racism, and ethnicity, and their feelings and thoughts on topics of decolonisation. Finally, we hosted weekly drop-in sessions where members of the centre could join researchers and advisors for any questions or share their thoughts on some of the topics related to the project.
Okay, so some themes and findings from our methods and the project are the following. So the first is learning by doing. As a group, we, using these different procedures and practices that have been outlined, we learned what it means to try and embody a decolonial praxis, particularly centering relationality in our process and not just focusing on the outcomes of the project. which was particularly hard to do when we only had 6 months, but we tried to slow ourselves down and really think about it. It was also really important to have lots of different spaces for discussion and different types of discussion. So like Beth said, having drop-in sessions where people from the centre felt safe to come and ask whatever questions they had, but also having spaces for our advisory board and myself to be able to talk about how we were feeling in the project as well. There was an openness in the centre for these conversations. Many people were willing and interested in learning and reflecting more, but felt afraid or alienated by the language of decolonisation and worried about getting it wrong. So one of the key findings from our survey from Included is the following, and I'll just read out a quote from their report. So they said, centre members believe that anti-racism and decolonisation are important to include in their work, but their lack of knowledge of how to incorporate it into their research and teaching prevents them from taking steps to do so. The second finding is that ECEHH is quite inclusive overall and generally psychologically safe, but it isn't very diverse, particularly for ethnicity and sexual orientation. And number 3 was that perceptions of transparency and objectivity in decision-making are quite low, particularly for promotion, termination, and remuneration decisions. Another theme is inclusion and kindness. We weren't surprised to find that a lot of people in the centre already feel the centre is very welcoming and inclusive. But as already mentioned, we don't really know if this pertains to people who are minoritized because it's such a white majority space. And finally, a couple of themes that came through our interviews was that actually a few academics recognize that thinking about environment and health together is something that has always had roots in racial justice movements, because it actually emerged from the US, I think in the sort of 1980s, and these came out of community movements. And finally, on the theme of international collaborations, it was interesting that academics working with partners outside of Europe were quite thoughtful about global power dynamics and tried to think about publishing and sharing resources fairly within their teams. But obviously we weren't able to get perspectives from our international partners, so this is a bit of a bias. And the other thing was that the extent to which projects could be managed in a balanced way was significantly affected by the stipulations of different funding grants.
Thank you very much, both of you.
One more slide.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself, the classic. So we've already outlined some of the legacies that we created throughout our project in terms of the resources that we were able to put together. But perhaps more importantly, we feel that a major legacy is that we were able to begin uncomfortable conversations and empowered people to feel more able to discuss race and racism. And we know that there has been ongoing dialogue between people in the centre about how they can incorporate critical perspectives into their research and teaching. One of the limitations, which others have already mentioned, is that due to the short time of the project, we weren't able to implement any concrete measures or incorporate new policies or protocols into the centre, which would help to tackle some of the more systemic changes, and was something that we had hoped to do at the beginning of the project. So thanks everyone for listening. Thanks, Olivia, and thank you to everyone who was listed on our first slide. We couldn't have done it without the input from everyone.
Thank you very much, Beth and Olivia. And I think some issues raised there that will probably be familiar with a lot of people on the call who are working in an academic setting and helping colleagues to try to navigate the language issues and also confidence around equality, diversity and inclusion. So thank you very much. So I'm going to pass over to our next speaker, who is Alex Ford, who's going to be talking about the REGES project. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, everybody. Hopefully you can all see my slides. I can't see myself, so hopefully you can hear me okay. So this is a project that I was interested in because there was an initiative that came up in our university a couple of years ago where we were trying to improve the numbers of students that were going from undergraduate level to postgraduate level. And I couldn't take part because we didn't have any ethnic minority students at an undergraduate level to actually progress. So there was clearly something going on in the pipeline. And we we were sort of somebody that's been in marine sciences for over 20 years. I think people regard marine sciences as very much a white degree, unfortunately. And speaking with people in different employment sectors as well, they were saying that they were struggling to meet their diversity targets because there just weren't the people in the pipeline coming through. And we know this has been addressed by Royal Society of Chemistry and the Royal Society of Biology in a number of different reports over the years, but those didn't particularly focus on marine sciences or environmental sciences. So we initially wanted to try and get a handle on the problem. So we did a survey of ethnic minority applications coming into UCAS and their acceptance rates in marine environmental sciences. So we looked at over 25,000 applications over 3 years between 2019 and 2021. We also did a survey of marine course leaders, and we managed to survey 46 course leaders in terms of their perspective, whether there is a problem and what they think some of the drivers might be. We then surveyed some school leavers that were around about the age where they're choosing sort of A levels, about to go to university, and we surveyed 408 of those, of which just over 100 were from ethnic minority backgrounds. And we looked at whether they were going to choose sciences, whether they're interested in marine sciences, whether they're interested in the marine environment, how they felt the marine environment was important to them in terms of climate change, in terms of their health and well-being. And we did a similar survey with the general public as well, where we had over 1,000 respondents, and half of them were deliberately targeted using a professional survey company as being from ethnic minority backgrounds. And then we did our own survey of marine course pages, because we were aware that there was probably quite a lot of variation in how people were sort of selling their courses from an EDI perspective. And we've also did an educational animation, which sort of brings all this together, which I'll show you shortly. So this is what we learned. It's a rather long list, sorry, because we did so many surveys and we probably were a little bit too ambitious. But marine sciences were the least diverse degrees in the UK. Now, these weren't just the least diverse degrees in STEM subjects. These were the least diverse degrees full stop, which is really worrying. And when we went in to look at the proportion of application versus acceptance rate, you were less likely to be accepted if you're Asian on environmental sciences, but not marine sciences. Now, course leaders perceived that there was a problem, but through the surveys, it was clear that they weren't quite sure how to address it. School leavers from ethnic minority backgrounds are more likely to consider marine sciences, but ultimately then not choose it. Ethnic minority groups have different perceptions than white respondents in what do marine scientists do. Most of the white respondents thought that marine scientists go into academia. Most of our Black, Asian or mixed respondents thought that marine biologists went into government or NGOs, when in fact that they're all wrong, when most of them go into the private sector. So there's clearly some work that needs to be done there in terms of how we promote where the jobs are in this area. Ethnic minority groups watch more natural history TV than white respondents, and that was across the school survey and the general public survey, although they equally value the importance of the oceans to human and ecosystem health, and that was the same across both surveys as well. All surveys, our course leader, our school survey and our general public survey, pointed to a lack of role models in ethnic minority groups on television. Marine science degrees don't mention EDI on their web pages. If you go into university landing pages, they all mention EDI. If you go into marine sciences course pages, only 9% of the 56 pages that we looked at mention EDI on those pages. This is some of the UCAS data, and it really quite starkly displays the problem that we have. The first graph on the left-hand side, this is the total number of applicants relative to the population going into marine and environmental sciences. The middle map is Asian students relative to the Asian population in that area, and the far right graph is the black applicants relative to the black population. The grey is that there was no data whatsoever. And what's quite stark is if you look at kind of Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, there's just no applicants over 3 years. And I say that with a caveat that UCAS data, if the numbers are below 3, they count it as a 0. So 1, 2 and 3 is counted as 0 for disclosure controls. Grey in this instance is there's no data and it's a real 0. But it looks quite stark. And you can see the proportion of marine science and environmental sciences that are 100% white on the course. Again, just to be a little bit careful with some of those numbers may be slightly inflated by the fact that there may have been 1, 2 or 3 students that are black, Asian or mixed, which may have been counted as 0 there. This is our animation.
We are in need of a broader perspective to solve issues that affect us all, like climate change, resource management, sustainable fisheries, and pollution. It is crucial that we develop leaders across all ethnic backgrounds in order to ensure that there is an increased engagement in marine science by the wider UK population. Our research at the University of Portsmouth has discovered that there is a clear gap between the percentage of minority students in marine sciences when compared to those in the wider STEM group. Our study has found that approximately 82% of marine science course and module leaders believe there is difficulty in recruiting ethnic minority students. 86% also believe this has had a knock-on effect in recruiting within marine science careers. And approximately 70% think there are not sufficient role models in natural history programs from different ethnic minority backgrounds. Similarly, 93% of school leavers surveyed believe that healthy oceans are important for a healthy planet, but only 22% of school leavers have ever considered a career in marine or ocean sciences. There are various possible explanations for this low level of recruitment, such as pre-existing perceptions of what a marine science degree involves and a lack of understanding of what fields you can enter into. Socioeconomic or cultural factors could play a role, or a lack of existing representation could be unappealing to potential applicants. Low recruitment levels may be determined by a lack of promotion in schools in favour of other STEM fields, or due to geographical factors. We have considered some possible solutions to tackle this issue. Demonstrating that the degree can open doors to influence all sections of society can help those with preconceived ideas of what a marine scientist does. Being proactive and captivating school students with information on marine science or introducing more scholarships could encourage a higher intake. Students could find an appeal in seeing more representation of their ethnic group within the field. The use of appropriate marketing in university promotional materials could also contribute to an increase in engagement. As ecological issues become a bigger topic of conversation, it is important that everyone has a seat at the table. Having marine scientists representing the wider community provides global benefits as we aim to protect the planet and live sustainably. This can start with ensuring that we do all we can to promote recruitment into marine science. We are in need of...
So the final thing that we did was to try and develop some pledges that we thought course leaders could sign up to. And we wanted these pledges to be something that the course leaders could action themselves and didn't necessarily need to go up to the Vice Chancellor of a university to actually feel that they could put their name to them. So the 4 pledges that we asked course leaders to sign up to were incorporate marine sciences into their STEM and widening participation programs, review their online and printed course materials to demonstrate they're showing some EDI language, encourage the universities to provide EDI training for course leaders, because very much they're the ones that are involved in doing the course leadership, course leaders pages, not EDI marketing people, and explore the use of university incentive schemes such as scholarships. So there's 25 universities in the UK that offer marine sciences, and thankfully so far we've had half of them sign up to these pledges, and we hope to get the other half signed up over the rest of the year. So I'd just like to sort of finish on just thanking the team from across University of Portsmouth and a number of societies that we kind of touched base with during the course of the project, which gave us some useful advice along the way. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Alex. Really nice to hear about some of the ideas to support a greater representation of minority students in marine sciences. Thank you. So our next speaker is Dr. Natasha Dowie from Sheffield Hallam University, who's going to be talking about the Equator Project. Thank you, Natasha. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can people hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I'm going to assume that you can.
Natasha, you're muted.
Sorry, I was just sorting out my audio. Thank you. Hopefully that now works.
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Great. Apologies. Okay. Okay, hopefully that is okay. Hi, my name's Natasha Dowie, and I am here to present on the Equator Project, which set out to improve equity in postgraduate geography, earth and environmental science research. It involved a large group of collaborators, both on the project team and in the steering committee, which involved professional bodies, grassroots organisations, students, and also academics and doctoral training partnerships. This is obviously just a very much a whistle-stop tour of the project. You can link to the full project report in the QR code at the top of the screen, and I'll also share the project website at the end of the talk. In terms of what we set out to do, we wanted to really focus on this broken pipeline issue of the retention of ethnic minority students into postgraduate research. So it's been shown and documented that this is a result of structural, organisational and cultural inequities in work such as by leading roots in the broken pipeline report. And we know that there are discipline-specific issues with the environmental sciences. So we chose to focus on geography, earth and environmental science because of those discipline-specific hostile environments and lack of visible role models. And some of that role model issue has just been discussed previously by Alex. In the kind of short time frame that we had, we set out to increase retention and improve experience by creating a discipline-specific ring-fenced mentoring network, which paired students with mentors from both industry and academia. And this involved 10 ethnic minority students, and they were each paired with one academic mentor and one industry mentor. Both mentors had a research career, had a career in research. And then to improve access and participation, we set out to create and deliver a 5-day residential ring-fenced research school for ethnic minority undergraduate, masters and doctoral students. This ran for 30 students and took place in Sheffield in April. 20 of those students were undergraduate and master's students. So we had one stream that was for postgraduate research students. And then 10 of the students who were sponsored by additional funding from the British Geological Survey, they were already in postgraduate study. And this school provided research training, access to role models, visible role models. It facilitated networking and was really aiming to create an equitable access to some of this information that these students may not have been able to achieve before. Both the research school and the mentoring network were fully funded. So we paid participants for their time, as well as remunerating them for expenses like travel and subsistence. And then finally, to remove barriers to access, we created a doctoral training working group to share best practice and develop recommendations to make PhD recruitment more equitable. And this involved setting up a working group that involved 6 NERC-funded DTPs, so doctoral training partnerships and centres for doctoral training, We also included Sheffield Hallam as a kind of post-92 university voice, with staff who work in doctoral recruitment here, and the Comet Network. And that group met 3 times, and the work there involved very open and frank discussions about what practice was already happening in terms of doctoral recruitment and equity. And we also ran an anonymous survey and then developed and shared recommendations from that work. In terms of why Equator was perhaps novel, was that it was very much student-led. So of the kind of 7 members of the project team, 3 of us were very recent PhD graduates. So our researchers who led each of these work streams had very recently graduated from their own PhDs, and all had shared lived experience with what kind of barriers we were hoping to address. It was very collaborative in the sense that although we were taking a discipline-specific approach, because we felt that was important given some of the very subject-specific issues that we were trying to tackle, we also reached out to work beyond those traditional silos, which has already been mentioned here. So rather than just geologists looking at this, we combined the RGS, so Royal Geographical Society, the Geological Society of London, and the Institute of Environmental Sciences were all partners in this. We also involve grassroots organisations such as Black Geographers, Black in Geoscience, Diversity in Geoscience, and spent many conversations planning out how we were going to attack this. And this work actually stemmed from an original research paper, a paper that we had written as a group before this funding actually happened. We also took a theory of change, action, research approach. So we wanted to carry out interventions. We wanted to actually make change and impact students. And in doing that, we kind of took our lead from a more social science approach of planning out, the eventual change we wanted to envisage, and then working out how our interventions would have to gradually, step by step, work towards achieving that. And we undertook qualitative feedback before, during, and after each of our interventions. In terms of what we learnt that inclusive, ring-fenced, fully funded, discipline-specific initiatives work and are needed. I wish I could share with you more of the results from the analysis and from the evaluation of the mentoring and the research school. I've just included this one, which I think is quite a nice and striking example. So when our kind of undergraduate master's level stream of the research school were asked, are they planning to apply for postgraduate research? Before the school, only 22% said yes, whereas after the school, 56% said yes. And again, we have many quotes that really summarize some of them are really powerful actually and quite heartbreaking, particularly the before evaluation of why students felt so shut out of postgraduate research. And this from our post-school survey for the research school, I felt was a good representation of some of those. Before this research school, I didn't have any confidence that I can have a career in GES, Geography, Earth and Environmental Science, or do a PhD, mainly because I am from a minority group and never in my university career met someone doing a PhD or research who was just like me. This research school gave me so much confidence that I am worth it and that I can have a career in GES research. In terms of other things that we learned from this process, we learned, like many of the other talks today have pointed towards, that co-creation and sharing ideas and best practice is essential in these efforts. It's no use working on EDI in a closed off room, and critically working with the communities that you're hoping to benefit in these efforts. And lastly, we really learned that, in this 6-month project, although it was an incredible thing to be a part of, we had a really limited reach and a limited scope, and that we really need more joined up, more holistic funding that looks across the educational pipeline, that gives enough time and resource to ensure that trust can be built with stakeholder communities, and that they can be remunerated for their time, that staff have enough time to actually work on the project, and that this is all overseen and coordinated. And we really feel that there's an opportunity for funding councils to be real beacons for anti-discriminatory practice by working with those who are undertaking EDI and by centrally generating and disseminating best practice for entire communities. In terms of good practice that we would like to share, again, it's difficult to kind of distill it down in this talk, but we have a number of resources that we've now released on our website. So we've developed recommendations for making doctoral recruitment more equitable. We presented some of this work in the last couple of weeks at a separate NERC event for doctoral training organisations. And this work includes 19 recommendations that are split into categories around student-facing, procedural and evaluation. And they're really focused on targeting just one of the structural barriers that is a real prevention to students from ethnic minority backgrounds accessing postgraduate research. And that's things like evaluation metrics and interviews still being very much focused on traditional views of excellence, not taking into account access to opportunity, not taking into account the well-known awarding gaps that we have in our academic system. And these are now available online. We've also made a similar document, recommendations for building interventions to improve access and sense of belonging in postgraduate research. We really wanted to share some of the methodology that we implemented in the research school and mentoring network, because the feedback from the participants was so good and so many people were just saying, we just want this to happen again. When can this happen again? We want to be involved in the next one. We want to be, there speaking to the next generation of students. So as well as in the report where we say what we did, we really wanted to lay out some ideas of how others could go about trying to recreate and generate their own interventions to actually impact students who are studying right now. As I mentioned at the top, we created a full report explaining what we did and evaluating our outcomes within this theory of change approach. And our hope is that the more that we can get reports like this in front of senior leaders and in front of funding councils, that this kind of work will receive the funding and the time that it needs. And also on our website, we've got some experiences from our participants. So our research school participants, some of those recently wrote a blog on their experience. We're now starting to try and get some articles out there about what we did and some of the recommendations that have come from the report. So Ben Fernando is leading a Nature Geoscience submission on making PhD recruitment more equitable. Manira Raji, who led the research school, we are soon to have out a geoscientist article summarising some of the work that she led on there. So yeah, I would really recommend that people visit the website if they're able to and get in touch with us with any questions. I guess the final point would just be that, we know that these problems are there. So many of the talks today have shown in data form that these problems exist, that we have a problem with inequity in academia. We have a problem with making our environmental disciplines as accessible as possible to minoritized groups, and that it is now time to really invest in action to make change in this area.
Thank you very much, Natasha. I think some really great resources to share with the community there, so thank you. And also important to make the point about joined up thinking and funding across the educational pipeline. I think not just for us as funders, but also for universities as well. So thank you very much. So our next speakers are AC Davidson, Bethany Fox, Roxana Din, and Vicky Trowler from the University of Huddersfield, who are going to be talking about the Gaia project. Thank you.
Hi there. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, so because of teaching commitments, our project team has kind of been in and out of today's call, so sorry to have missed some of the earlier talks. So our project team is AC Davidson, myself, Senior Lecturer in Human Geography, Beth Fox, Senior Lecturer in Physical Geography, Roxana Dean is program leader for the Science Extended degree, which is a foundation level degree program in our school. And Vicky Trowler is a research fellow in student engagement in higher education. So as previous speakers have said, we're also quite a multidisciplinary team. And our project is entitled Gaia, Geoscience, Access, Inclusion and Attainment. But in the presentation title, we've said, and belonging, because that came up as quite a key theme for us. So in brief, what did we actually do? Well, our focus was on the undergrad level and the pipeline into undergraduate geosciences degree, and specifically thinking about, I mean, as was mentioned also with marine sciences in a previous presentation, the geosciences are one of the least diverse of the sciences. And we were thinking about it not only in terms of ethnicity, but in terms of a range of sort of factors of underrepresentation. So socioeconomic backgrounds that are underrepresented, educational backgrounds, disabilities and sexualities, as well as ethnicities. Similar to the Equator project, we took an action research method approach. So we attempted interventions, a range of the interventions are visible here. And all the photos in the slides are also from the various aspects of the project. And we also got ethical review to be able to reflect on our interventions, hopefully once we get the time to then, write published papers about it as well. The first aspect was creating role model profiles and engaging role models in all our activities as well. So these are role models who have done a geoscience degree and who come from some of the underrepresented groups that I highlighted earlier. And they came from a range of careers. We were really quite keen not to have too many who were researchers and PhDs, because the vast majority of undergraduates won't go on to further study. So we wanted to show a range of role models from different careers that aren't even necessarily geoscience related, to show that a geoscience degree can go into a vast variety of different careers and jobs. We also had geoscience taster workshops. So we had 3 workshops which were held at local museums in the north to allow also friends and family sort of accompany the students to come along, or future students to come along. The aim of those geoscience taster workshops was pre-higher education level, right? So people who may be interested in a geoscience degree in future, plus their guardians, carers, parents to come along as well. And the idea was to enthuse them about geosciences, to get them to have an impression of what it might be like to study it, and what kind of careers you could have with a geoscience degree. We covered travel and food expenses, and we paid for time as well for all the attendees, so parents and carers, as well as the prospective students. They were led by ourselves, but also role models and some of our current students, because part of our project was really to ensure that there was also paid work opportunities for the role models and for our current students to gain experience on the project. We had a 3-day spring school, which the picture I think on the bottom and the left are from the spring school. And the aim for that was to give a more in-depth view of studying geoscience and more of a chance to interact with ourselves and the role models. And we felt there was a big gap in terms of spring school, summer school type provision, where, they're often focused in London or Oxbridge, often have barriers in terms of grades that you need to achieve to get in. And we wanted to offer a fully paid as well opportunity for those with more untraditional routes into higher education, who don't necessarily have, the 4 A's at A level and might not end up going into the top ranking universities. We also provided all field clothing and equipment. We had a workshop on UCAS help, how to create personal statements. And it was during Ramadan, so we had made sure we had prayer spaces available and times in the schedule, and had food vouchers rather than offering lunch, so people could buy food and eat it later. Finally, we did principles workshops. The thinking with this was, so this was aimed at existing geoscience students or previous geoscience students. And the thinking behind this was to develop a set of principles for how to better make the geosciences more inclusive and more equitable, because we were thinking it's not enough, it's not ethical really to bring on board more students from underrepresented backgrounds if their experience on the actual degree is not going to be equitable, just, and a good experience. So we co-created these workshops with a very experienced facilitator, Manju Patel Nair from Changemakers Unlimited, who has experience on social justice projects. We had 1 in person, 2 online. We had quite big travel bursaries for the 1 in person so that people could come from far. Again, we paid for time because this is important, EDI work that the students are doing in creating these principles, and we wanted to recognize that. And we made the workshops quite open-ended to really be able to hear from them about how they felt, based on their experiences, geoscience degrees could be made more accessible. So in terms of what we learned, too much really for a single slide. So we'll be signposting you later to the resources that we've created. But some key highlights from the spring school. A big learning for us was it takes a huge amount of time and resource to do it properly, a huge amount of staff time. We had interns helping us. We had our role models coming in to lead sessions. And all of that, because we wanted everything to be paid fully as well. We wanted, again, to provide food. All these things required a lot of liaison with finance. We wanted also the opportunity to pay in cash, ideally, in case people didn't have bank accounts. All of that was a huge administrative sort of hurdle. And it shows that universities aren't really necessarily set up to facilitate doing things in the most equitable way. Learning from the workshops, I think a big thing from the taster workshops was that a lot of people interested in the geosciences might not necessarily know what can be done with a degree. So they might just have quite an amorphous sense of what is a geoscientist, or what can you do with it? And they really benefited a lot, or enjoyed also hearing about what some of the degrees, what the degrees can lead to, some of the careers, sorry. In terms of the success of the spring school and the workshops, it's hard to know yet, in a sense, whether it's successful, because we didn't so much, our aim wasn't direct recruitment onto, a geography or geoscience degree. But from feedback we gathered, people really, really valued it and enjoyed it. And we do currently have actually 2 students who were on the spring school who did end up coming to Huddersfield, even though that really wasn't the main aim. And some of the feedback from the spring school was very, very positive. So one student said, I liked how there was a variety of different workshops, like some in a classroom and labs and fieldwork. And I really liked I got to meet so many people from different careers, and it helped to understand there are so many careers within geoscience. And it could be improved by maybe more sessions on what day-to-day roles and duties different geoscience people do job-wise. So they even wanted more of that kind of what can you do with geoscience. From the principals workshops, and this is where we have a short video that came out of this because we wanted to disseminate that quite widely. And we have a report also highlighting some of the principles the students came up with. Field trip accessibility was a big point. So embedding accessibility into planning at every stage, covering the costs of equipment, making it available for free or for loan, not presuming prior knowledge of equipment, like even boots or jackets, or not presuming people have the outdoor gear or know what's needed. Thinking about access at locations. Are locations safe for LGBTQ+ students, safe for students of color? Are they physically accessible? And making plans and field trip itineraries clear in advance. So for the things we can't anticipate, students are empowered to raise issues early, and in a sort of, confidential way as well. Including more diverse voices in lectures and sessions. So even if, individual staff members lower down the rungs can't necessarily make staff more diverse overnight, we do have the power to invite guest lecturers or practitioners that come from more diverse backgrounds. Decolonising the curriculum was mentioned quite a lot, but specifically not as an add-on. So they were very keen that geography and geoscience considers decolonisation as embedded. They've seen the word embedded mentioned a few times throughout the degree rather than as an optional module in the final year. And finally, fostering belonging. So considering religious and cultural events and needs, getting names and pronunciation right, considering Ramadan, for example, like we did for the spring school. Those kinds of initiatives can foster a sense of belonging. And from some of the principals' workshops, we had some really good quotes that students had. One was, "I have experiences that I would like to share, as I hope that those can make change happen." So that students who are going through and into higher education in geography and environmental sciences are more included and feel belonging more than I felt when I was at university. It's important to talk about past experiences in order to learn for the future and to make changes. Also, the more students speak out, the quicker change can happen. And another student said, "Diversity and inclusion should be built from the bottom up. Always listen to students and those with the experience you're trying to adjust for." And some wider learning points is from what we've done is also that, in a sense, the barriers to access to geosciences start earlier than university as well. And so we are, I think Beth in a minute will talk a little bit more about future work as well. But it doesn't mean that in higher education we can't do a lot in terms of outreach and changing our own practices. And I think, just echoing what many others have said already, if we're serious about enhancing belonging and inclusion, that work itself and that research itself has to be done in an ethical and just way. So thinking carefully about, who is doing the research, whose name is on the slides, who is being funded to do it, who benefits from it, and thinking about, including those for whom the access and inclusion is intended as authors, and being acknowledged within the work as well, for the and being paid for their work as well. So Beth, are you back from teaching? Are you able to do the last slide? Oh, I can't hear Beth. So maybe she's not back yet. So I will just, I think also we are running over time, aren't we? So sorry, Beth, if you are trying to speak, but I can't hear you. So just to say on this final slide, those are some of our role model profiles. So you can check out the role model profiles on the website geoaccess.org.uk. And the principles from the principals workshops, the YouTube video is a very short sort of introduction to some of those principles, and the full report is also on geoaccess.org.uk. I think in the interest of time, that was all I wanted to say, but wanted to give contact details here of the four of us, but also to give acknowledgement to everybody who assisted on the project and were part of the project in some way. And just going back to what Natasha said, also in terms of working together, a lot of the role models that helped us on our spring school had also been at the Equator School. So there's lots of overlap there and kind of mutually beneficial work, I think, that can be done. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Some really good principles and learning from that project. So our next speakers are Julius Baker and Saida Salam from the University of Portsmouth, who are going to be talking about their work with Bangladeshi communities. Thank you.
Can everyone see my screen? Is that?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Okay, cool. I'm just going to jump right in. We'll be representing our project team today. And as we've seen today, we know that the environmental sciences lack ethnic diversity, but we know less about the ways of working with ethnic minority communities to address this EDI problem. And our research has attempted to bridge this gap between measuring statistics about EDI and understanding minoritized students' lived experiences at the pre-university stage. So it's really going to connect well with the previous two papers we've heard. The originality of our work stems from using participatory methods to co-create EDI knowledge about the environmental sciences with the Bangladeshi community of Portsmouth. And today we're going to share with you some of the participatory techniques behind our JAM method and take a qualitative look at some of the students' experiences, which really place belonging at the heart of the EDI agenda. So I'm going to hand over to Saida now, who will take you through the method.
Hi everyone. So I'll talk a little bit about how we carried out the research and the methodologies that we used. The participatory methods used throughout the project developed a sense of involvement and ownership from the students as they were able to direct the research themselves. The initial recruiting was carried out by the research team with significant support from a community champion of Bangladeshi heritage through various local groups, social media, and by directly contacting schools and colleges. We also partnered with a creative social enterprise called called Seekers Create, who developed the promotional materials and used for recruiting, and they also developed arts and digital activities that we used. 22 young people took part in a pre-event planning workshop. Students were empowered to co-create the themes of the Jam itself, culminating in an environmental vision board, which also became the cover of their Jam notebooks. A snowball effect followed as these students informed their friends to take part in the environmental Jam. The Jam itself, which was attended by 32 students, included an outdoor nature trail along Portsmouth's coastline with interactive use of Nearpod, a creative arts workshop, separate student and parent focus groups, and individual follow-up interviews. These participatory engagement activities proved to be successful, with numerous students requesting more opportunities, teachers seeking partnership with the geography department at the University of Portsmouth, and with parents requesting information sessions to understand the career prospects that result from pursuing environmental science at degree level.
Thank you. So we know that the pipeline into the environmental sciences, while very effective for white students, has been many leaks when it comes to ethnic minority ones. And it's important to recognize that the factors and barriers producing these racialized pathways, both into and out of the environmental sciences, are multifaceted and interrelated. However, from listening to students' narratives, it became clear that the overarching factor and barrier for students of Bangladeshi heritage is simply that the environmental sciences are perceived as something that's not for them. This perception was compounded along two main axes. That is, it was compounded by the environmental sciences being conflated with social activism on climate change and the GCSE geography syllabus. And this is in part due to students and parents having little knowledge of the discipline or awareness of the environmental sciences as a career. So on the one hand, most students' ideas about the environmental sciences being white were connected to these generic TV and social media images they would see about high-profile public figures. And on the other hand, the conflation of with GCSE geography was connected to the lived experiences of symbolic exclusion and microaggression they would experience in the classroom. And this was from parents and students encountering it through geography classrooms, through the curriculums and teachers, with all this leading to a general perception that the environmental sciences were rich and white, boring and voluntary, and again, not for them. And these poignant quotations from our students highlight the various ways in which racialized inequalities shape the UK's educational system. And it reveals multiple facets to the problem of representation. I'm going to read through them now to give their voices chances to speak. So, but if you look at the schools and how they teach things, it's not right. I think the education system still needs a lot of work doing. They don't touch on colonialism. It's like World War II, World War I, because that makes them look good. You don't say about, oh, we went back and we did things like we chopped off people's arms for sugar and things like that. And that was apparent from the study. And a student thinking about the classroom space said, like, I don't like it. Bangladesh and South Asian countries being represented as less developed because that's my country. I want like everyone to have a good reputation on us. And then moving to their experiences outside of the classroom, we see one say, I realized, oh, how come they're all white? It's like you don't see things that it's like you see things that people want you to see. And in science, I saw the white people and the white scientists in the book, because that's what people at the school want us to know about. So we don't learn about any other colored scientists. So what we see here then is that in the classroom, it becomes a space of racial stereotyping and micro invalidations from their predominantly white geography school teachers and Eurocentric syllabuses. And this can stem from the symbolic denigration of one's home country that aligns geography and by extension the environmental sciences with the racialized superiority of the West. Or it could even extend to the erasure of Black and Indigenous knowledge systems from Western science that tells these students that the environmental sciences are not for you. And the problem is highlighted even further by the fact that many of these students really enjoy the environmental science activities associated with the JAM, but they continue to describe geography as boring. And overall, this shows that NERC has a vested interest in decolonising geography syllabuses as much as environmental science ones, which is especially important because as a discipline with its multiple feeder streams from chemistry to biology, we need to tackle all aspects of that pipeline. And to use the words of Sirin Hughes, Eurocentric education should not be the norm of the 21st century classroom. If we do not make these changes, we remain complicit with racism. And applying this critical race theory in this way to the EDI problem is essential because it connects students' perceptions of whiteness to the racism they can encounter in natural landscapes. So here we have one student saying, so seeing loads of white people there, that makes me feel out of place and that I shouldn't be there, like in the countryside or like an old house or something like that. And while this can seem like a cultural space in which they're excluded, we also see brute comments such as this, where they encounter racist violence in public spaces about being called public curry munchers. And while this is interesting, the key point is that they actually had strong senses of attachment to the coast and other areas of England, despite this association with white cultural practices, be that from the British seaside culture or from stately homes. So these geographies of racism and exclusion speak more to their encounters with racist violence and narrow representations of Englishness, rather than their actual ability to belong in the natural environment. And we'll see why this is important when we move on to our next slide about our interventions. So our model for EDI in the environmental sciences rests upon designing interventions that will construct a sense of belonging for ethnic minority students within this academic discipline and profession. And our key strategies are based upon the students' and parents' ideas about what would encourage them or their child to study the environmental science at the degree level or work in it as a career. And mentors were seen as really important. So this is about building students' senses of self-efficacy, or the belief that they could not only belong, but they could succeed in the discipline. And it was also about having environmental scientists work with schools and teachers, as well as provide work experience opportunities and career talks, which reflects the central importance of having role models for these students, which they identified as being lacking. So while the idea of role models is obviously not new, our study found that the students could challenge the taken for granted value of racial matching between role models and students. It wasn't necessarily required that for a role model to be effective, they had to be of Bangladeshi heritage. So although this does not alter the problem of predominantly white environmental science departments, it does show that racial difference is not an insurmountable barrier to communication, and thereby to changing the future of the colour line within the environmental science sector. And family and community outreach were also seen as essential. This means that working with families and communities to raise a profile of environmental science, and particularly to present it as a viable career to young Bangladeshi heritage students, which could rival the expected choices and cultural status of medicine, law, and finance, which we often found. And finally, a key output from the JAM was our JAM method. And we're putting together a strategy and action pack that will be available online, and it will outline how to organize a student-led JAM, but also why this participatory approach matters for EDI research, and crucially, to cultivate a sense of shared ownership between those involved. And from presenting our research at a previous conference, we've already had people ask for a copy of our JAM method in order to create a linguistics JAM, which shows the significance that our EDI research has as a method beyond just the environmental sciences. So, as our students recommended, a central aspect of future JAMs should be outdoor trail activities that can engage minority ethnic students with the natural environment. But we've also heard here today that there are some real issues to consider about accessibility surrounding field trips, even though they are the bonding glue for the discipline often. And this brings us to our EDI model based upon inclusion, equity, and diversity, which places belonging at the heart of environmental science to make it feel like it's something for students of Bangladeshi heritage or other BAME minority groups. And this focus on belonging is the main way we should see as fostering a global voice on environmental issues, which does not yet exist. And in the interest of time, I won't go through this model in detail, but it basically connects together equality, diversity, and inclusion, putting belonging at the center. And I can answer any questions about that when it comes to it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Julius and Saida. That's a great project and really nice learning for everyone on the call. Thank you. Our final speaker today is Kate Sang from Heriot-Watt, who's going to be talking about enabling neurodiverse, inclusive science careers. Kate.
Yeah, thank you. My computer's just a little bit slow, but it is trying to share my screen. Okay, so while it's being a bit slow and so that we don't fall further back in time, so I'm going to be presenting our project called Enabling Neurodiversive Inclusive Science Careers, NDISC, and this builds on our work that was funded by EPSRC as part of the Inclusion Matters scheme, which was Disability Inclusive Science Careers. So I'm Kate Sang, I was the PI. We were supported by 2 postdoctoral research associates, Kat Morgan and Lena Vongen. And our co-investigators were Clayton McGill, David Wolfe, Teresa Fernandez, and Fenella Watson, who was the project manager. So we're an interdisciplinary team. I come from a business school. I'm a sociologist looking at the sociology of work and disability and gender. Kat is a computational sociologist. Lena comes from a literary studies background, and Clay, David, and Teresa are all marine scientists. And they work in the Lyle Centre, and we're all based at Heriot-Watt University. So what we did, there was a multi-phase approach to our project, and we started off with an evidence review to try and understand what the evidence was telling us about the experiences of neurodivergent researchers within environmental sciences. And the truth is there's very little research in this field. There is some work looking at experiences around fieldwork for undergraduate students, but the experience of staff is quite sparse. You'll notice that I don't use person first language. Our work is rooted in the social model of disability, and the vast majority of autistic people prefer identity first language. Hence we use the term neurodivergent person or autistic person or disabled person, not person with a disability or person with autism. And the evidence review revealed a large gap in the literature about understanding particularly the experiences of early career researchers in the environmental sciences. So we undertook a series of focus groups and interviews with neurodivergent early career environmental scientists, really digging into some of the literature around disability and to understand what their lived experiences were. And a number of issues came up, and I'll go over those in the next slide. And then we drew all of that together, our evidence review, our qualitative data collection, to develop some training materials. And after I finish sharing, I'll share a link to our work in the slide about understanding neurodiversity. And one of the things that's really clear through our research is there's very poor understanding of disability in universities, very poor understanding amongst PIs, and that neurodivergent people feel particularly neglected. It's important at this point to note that universities are an interesting site to do this kind of research because you have 2 populations. You have students and staff. And students have more rights, disabled students have more rights in universities than disabled staff do. So universities have a statutory responsibility to preempt the needs of disabled students, but they have no such responsibility for disabled staff. So for disabled staff, it's a reactive approach rather than a proactive approach. Now, it's not to suggest that everything's good for disabled students, but they do have more resources. So what we learned is that accounts of neurodivergent people in the workplace are very sparse. Most of the literature focuses on eradicating neurodiversity from the population or eradicating neurodiversity from the workplace. So in other words, it comes from a perspective of eugenics. So our data showed that the most significant barrier in academia was a lack of understanding and support for neurodivergent scientists. So many respondents said that they had disclosed neurodiversity in the workplace and that was the end of the conversation. There'd never been any adjustments offered. And that line managers and PIs just had a very poor understanding of neurodiversity in general. So we see there's quite a lot of training going on about raising awareness of neurodiversity, but that understanding is not there. And what we see through our data is that around 1/3 of early career researchers are indicating they plan on leaving academia, which is actually higher than UCU's survey showed. And around 3/4 have not requested any adjustments in the workplace. And this is consistent with our existing work on disability in the workplace, that disabled people are very reluctant to disclose because they fear quite significant career penalties. And our data would support that they are right not to disclose and that there is considerable stigma and stereotypes against disabled people. So what would we like to share? So the first thing I'd like to share is that we should use the social model of disability. And I've heard a few people today use the first person approach to disability or medicalized approach to disability. The social model of disability allows us to see disability as a form of oppression that arises when people with impairments or conditions interact with a working environment that is not suited to their needs. So in other words, neurodivergent people, so for example, autistic people, people with ADHD, dyslexia, are disabled not by being neurodivergent, they're disabled by neurotypical working environments. So we therefore must foster a culture of openness and inclusion that enables the support and inclusion of neurodivergent employees. We need to communicate very clearly what people's responsibilities are. So many people, principal investigators, for example, have no understanding that if someone discloses disability to you, you have a legal responsibility to do something about that. For example, explore reasonable adjustments. For many neurodivergent people, they found the pandemic enabled greater inclusion because they could work from home where their physical workspace was more adjusted to them, or laboratories, for example, were much quieter. So we need to consider how we allow greater flexibility, both for work schedules and work locations. And we need universities to be much more willing to provide adjustments. For example, we've got here including private office space, but it could be something simpler like noise cancelling headphones, could be working more flexible hours. There's a whole range of adjustments that people ask for. Also includes the kind of lighting that you have in offices. It includes PPE. For example, lab coats that have a label in the back can be very irritating for people who experience sensory overload. So it's a question of thinking a little bit more laterally and listening to the people you work with. And the final point I'd want to share is that good management for neurodivergent people is just good management. Giving clear management instructions is what we should do for everybody, setting clear expectations, demonstrating what we believe our social norms to be is just good management practice. So the other thing I'd like you to take away today is that we're not asking for neurodivergent and disabled people to be treated in a way that isn't consistent with good management. What we need is understanding. We need to embed the social model of disability, and we also need people to demonstrate good management skills. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Kate. That's very useful. Really important messages there around supporting neurodiversity in the workplace. So I believe we've got 15 minutes now for some questions and answers. So Susan, do you have some questions for our speakers today?
Yes, I do. So that's been a really amazing session. We've just had 7 talks that actually are generally tackling quite different areas, but I'm trying to work out effectively how to bring the questions around that pick up on some of the highlighted themes that I think have been coming through in this session and also this morning's session. And the reason I'm suggesting to try and do that is that the teams that have been presenting have been really efficient in answering questions themselves. I know it's a challenge when you're listening to a talk that you really engage with to also have a look at the questions that have been answered, but rather than repeat individual questions for teams, I wonder if we could take more of an approach to ask I think some of the thematic areas that have been coming through for the panel. So there've been a few questions that I've been picking up on how you got people to basically feel that they could trust you and share space with you, and also how you actually then approached understanding what was the correct way to interact with people that you were asking for information for. I think these are all questions that are relevant to this morning's speakers. So can we go for the trust first of all? I think there was one that was very specifically one to Dr. Apaya about how to capture individuals that don't want to disclose things, disclose personal characteristics, protected characteristics. There was one to the extra group about actually how you created that space with your teams and feeling that they weren't going to be inappropriately threatened by the work that you needed to undertake. So if anyone would like to comment on how we can create trust so that we can move this forward a bit more, that would be really good. I don't know who to specifically to address it to, so please just come off mute. Kate's put her hand up first.
So yeah, I mean, one of the ways to, was 2 things to say. One, to garner trust is for such work to be led by people who are on the lived experience of this themselves. So I'm a disabled researcher, for example, and our project was led by a number of neurodivergent people. So demonstrating that we're not doing research on people, we're doing research with people is really key. And I think the second one is not to kind of fly in, gather a whole lot of data, publish some papers, and move on to the next topic. You actually have to start to implement some kind of change to demonstrate that you are committed to furthering equity and eradicating inequalities from this space. So demonstrating that you are going to affect some change is really key. So those are two things for me. Is one is to demonstrate that you are leading, not from the sidelines, that you are doing this, you're living this yourself. And the second one is not to just sit on this and view it as a way of advancing your own career, but how do you start to affect some change?
Thank you, Kate. Pallavi?
Yeah, I agree with Kate, what she said about, connecting with people, and same thing kind of we took as well as a group, because we had people across the career stages in our project, so they could engage with their own community quite well to promote the survey and get the data. So, if people see people of their own, like kind of role models, then they are probably more willing to engage with kind of data collection as well. They're not afraid that it's okay. We have to also kind of give them assurance that, I think it's all about building trust with the community as well. If we go through the ethical approval, if we go through all the hoops and really explain it to the community or the participants that we are collecting this data, what is the purpose, how we are going to do things, what we are going to use it for, and continue some kind of engagement. So what we did is, like, although we didn't quite get as many blog posts written or communicate as much as we could have done, because we had to collect data and do other work as well, but having that connection with the community is really important, because, and publicize those. So as soon as we had blog posts written, we just kind of advertise it and make people aware of what we are doing. So I think it's keeping the connection going. People think that they are just, we are giving them back things, and we will be publishing data and everything on our website. So although the project has finished, we will continue to have that website live so that we can continue to engage with the community going forward.
Okay, thank you. And Olivia, could we take your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess one of the sort of ironies of our project is that obviously we were focused on decolonisation and, thinking through how you can make a research centre more diverse and safe for people from different backgrounds to be working there. And yet so much time and effort was put into thinking about the feelings of the white majority. And that was just something that we sort of had to manage. But, in a way, how we put together the advisory board was really important. And I think to some extent, making sure that we had good relationships amongst ourselves. It did take a bit of trust in the beginning. People were invited to the advisory board based on relationships that I already knew people through, or Beth already knew people through. And I think without those, we wouldn't have been able to have this actually diverse group of people working on the project. And we worked very much as a team, even though we had sort of 3 postdocs and a PI or whatever. The people on the advisory board were with us at every step of the work we were doing. So without them, our project would have been a white majority, white passing group working with majority white people. And this was just the problem we faced. And we had to try and think through, how can you work on decolonisation and anti-racism when you're in such a white majority space? So yeah, I'm really inspired by the work that Dr. Julius Baker was presenting, and thinking, how could a project that's, intervening at the pre-university stage then connect up with a project like ours when we're trying to bring people into the research centre? And sadly, there's still this gap. Who would be the people in the research centre that could mentor kids to encourage them to be part of the environmental sciences? So until these things are changing, we're going to have the same problem. So again, hopefully we just put a little bit of the groundwork down, but it's a major problem that's still there, structural problem.
Okay. Can I come in another area that I think is I've been picking up from questions that's been coming across all the talks, and that's that aspect of role models. So I'm sorry, I can't remember all the details that I've heard this morning, but Julius and Saida, you tried to show what it could look like to be in environmental sciences, Dr. Davidson had role models. The Equator Project was encouraging people to basically see that they could have that place there. And then the eDial project was actually giving us quite a lot of information about, there's some people maybe at the top, but we're not sure. They're really, we're really seeing the presence there of what we need. And is it a time issue? And there are certainly people are more used to, at the earlier career stages now, being more open about their gender fluidity, for example. What I'm wondering is there a gap in the middle? Is there really a gap in the middle, or is it that people are also not willing to be more open about their diversity? And do you have the sense that people that have been involved quite directly in that role model activity that we really need to, if you think that's has any sense to it, do we need to try and encourage more role models in the middle, because they will be the leaders of the future and also the ones that are making sometimes the decisions about the entry point. So Julius, you're nodding. Do you have any thoughts about that?
When you say in the middle, what do you mean by that?
I'm kind of thinking like the senior lecturer, reader level, the people who are now in permanent academic posts that will become our future more promoted staff.
Yeah.
And perhaps running the organizational activities such as DTP entries.
I think with the role model activities, it was really clear that the children actually really wanted activities brought to them in their schools and in spaces outside of it. So I think actually designing, because the environmental sciences aren't necessarily on the curriculum at the GCSE stage level. So designing interventions that you could, like learning resources, basically, that could be brought into schools. And one of the students that we were interviewing said this really nice sentence where it was like, it wouldn't really necessarily matter if they weren't of Bangladeshi heritage, but it would create more of a dialogue, and that they'd want to then support the actual researchers coming into the schools. So I think in that sense, then role models are really important, but the idea of racial matching, or that we can't communicate with people or have a successful intervention if it's not from within your community. I think that's actually quite it's not just a barrier, but it becomes like an excuse. It allows people to kind of step back from the issue at hand and say, well, I can't ever understand your experience, so I'm actually not going to take that effort to be uncomfortable, relinquish some of my power, and actually engage. Because if we are actually going to change these recruitment streams, or even just departments themselves, certain people would have to be willing to relinquish some of their power, rather than simply just engage in like the same habits, because the habits are what producing these institutional dynamics, right? So if you don't disrupt them or disempower yourself, then are you really invested in equity, or are you just invested in the image of diversity? Because they're two different things.
Okay, thank you. Natasha, I've got your hand up next, and then Jessica on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to come into really similar to Julius, actually. I think that, some people look at me as a white woman and have said, well, why are you a PI on a project around ethnic diversity and postgraduate research? And the simple truth is that if white people don't get involved in the work on this, then there's a real issue. We have to work together and bring in the communities and make sure that we are listening and recognizing our privilege and remunerating people for their time, so that it doesn't become an extraction of student experience or role models who are just having a cultural time tax on them because they're always the people who are involved in EDI. But I think it's too easy to say, oh, well, I'm white, so I'm not going to get involved in this issue. And I think that it is a difficult balance to tread if you're not part of the group that you're trying to tackle, trying to improve the situation and improve equity. But I think it's important to still have those conversations and to be part of that, to be part of these conversations in our discipline. So someone had just mentioned in the chat about, understandably, those from marginalized identities may not want to share their experiences. And I think that we do have a real responsibility when undertaking these tasks to make sure that people are paid, to make sure that they understand where that work is going. And the problem with the role model work is that for something like geoscience, for example, there are so few role models within those senior lecturer roles that inevitably you're asking and reaching out to maybe recent PhD graduates to be involved. And it's even more important then that those people are paid for and valued, and it's a very, very difficult thing, the role model thing. I think we have to be very cautious about it. And I think Julius's point is a really good one of not just assuming that one group is a match for one group. With our mentors on the Equator project, the mentees were ring-fenced. So all the mentees were from ethnic minority backgrounds, but the mentors, we ensured that every student had a mentor with a shared lived experience. So some way that they could understand that person, but we didn't try and match, you know, exact groups, partly because the numbers are so low for some subjects. And again, it would stop people from undertaking this kind of work if that was our intention, I think.
Thanks, Natasha. Jessica, can we hear from you? And then I will hand back to Lisa. And just to say that the questions we haven't answered in the chat, we will find, or the Q&A, we will find answers for and share with you as well. So we'd rather hear from you than NERC. Jessica?
Yeah, I don't want to take up too much time, so know we're running towards the end, but I want to say, just to echo obviously what our colleagues have just shared, but the risk in being the role model. You know, so if you're called on to constantly be sort of tokenized, depending on your identity, it's not something rewarded in the promotions process. So we have the issue of being expected to be the poster child for your identity in the institution, but that doesn't lead to that work of that extra burden does not lead to a better chance of promotion. In fact, there's certainly data to suggest that particular groups, especially scholars of color, are disadvantaged within the promotion process because of what's valued and what's not valued. And it's thinking about, you know, some of the data on previous projects I've worked on looked at EDI initiatives that are meant to do good in the world. So for example, and I'm not against this, but we want gender diverse hiring panels. But if you're the only senior woman in your department, you're on every hiring panel. And that's not something that our HRs are actually keeping track of. So when it comes to role models, we need them, we absolutely do. But it's also about how we're recognizing the burden that places on already historically excluded, marginalized, and discriminated against groups. So I would like to see more role models, but I want to see the recognition of the work that goes into that valued when it comes to things like promotion, like pay increases, that kind of thing. So I think there's what's not considered is the EDI work we want to do and the burden that places on already overburdened and already discriminated against and marginalized groups. So I think it's thinking about the whole picture as well as just, we don't just need to count the numbers of role models. We need to recognize the burden placed when you are one of the only or one of a few within that particular identity category in your department or your faculty.
And this is a problem that has been around for some time, but in a different dimension, as Laura has indicated in her question in the chat. Thank you, everyone. We don't have enough time actually to discuss this in the detail that we'd like to. Unfortunately, we're reaching the end of the session, so I'm going to pass back to Lisa to draw this online webinar conference to a close, and thank you all very much.
Thanks very much, Susan. So I'm just going to really briefly wrap up by thanking all of our speakers today. And also to thank our signers, Wendy and Rob. I hope you've all found the event useful, inspiring, have some things that you will take away and put into practice. We will be making the slides and the recording of the event available, and we will be finding some space to share the resources from the projects as well. And I hope you will all dig into those at some point in the not too distant future. So thank you very much.